Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto saves Kushina from Kumo. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Kami no Uzumaki and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Legend of the Kumjin no Kumte. Prologue. The genesis of the maelstrom. A storm was brewing, pitch black clouds roamed and engulfed the sky as thunderous booms of roaring lightning shot through the sky, piercing through the veil of the ebony night. The heavy rain pelted the land beneath it, soaking all it landed upon. The turbulent wind swirled with its speed and velocity, making the trees rustle and groan in protest. Long ago in ancient times before the era of shinobi, before the era of ninjin, was a time where mankind was still in its infancy. Among these humans lived one man who stood out from the majority. Bearing a staff and robes that depicted him as some sort of priest, a strange man whose violet ripple pattern orbs held the power to do miraculous things. Through the storm, through the forestry, a red blur ran past many of the trees, which was soon chased down by a couple of black blurs. The storm seemingly have no effect on whatever was running through the forest. Dashing through the dirt trails, weaving through the trees and hopping over the rivers, the blurs all sped through the forest. All none the wiser as the storm above them got harsher and more brutal with each passing second. This man was said to be the father of the ninjin, master of the elements, wielder of a power nigh any mortal could understand. It was this man that fought the apocalyptic monster with 10 tails. The harbinger of chaos and discord. The Juubi was its given moniker, a title bestowed from the priest, and it was soon told that the man fought down the beast and sealed it into himself, making him the first of what would be known as Yinchkriki. The sound of men cursing could barely be heard over the raging storm, deafening all other sounds. Animals tied to this forest were already hidden away, trying to keep themselves safe from the growing storm above them. A red blur shot past a den of bears which soon weaved through a couple of trees before jumping over a small ravine before dashing through the trees. This red blur was none other than a girl not even out of her teens. She could only be described as a young girl who, in spite of the anxiety, nervous and slight fear growing in her violet orbs, held an excellent show of agility and endurance at the speed and pace she was going. Though exhaustion was clear as day as her long maroon hair was matted down by the encroaching downpour, her clothes, though disheveled and torn slightly, showed they too were soaked to the bone. However, on his deathbed it is said he bestowed the youngest of his 2 sons his successor, and in doing so, the eldest grew to become hateful and spiteful towards his own sibling and had attacked him on the very night their father had died. However, on his deathbed the man had, before the Juubi could break free from its confinement, split the beast's power and soul in 9 different parts and sent them all across the continent while he had sealed the body in the sky, which was now known as of today as the moon. On that day that man was officially called the Rikidam Sennin of the 6 Paths, and while that was the same day a long line of family feud would develop later into a bloody rivalry between 2 clans. The young Ridid glanced over her shoulder and seemingly think she had lost her pursuers. She sighed slightly before she sped forth, trying to find the nearest safe location she could hide out for a while. Peering through the raging winds and heaving rage, she could see the faint outline of a small entrance, and desperate to find a safe haven as temporary as it may be, she dashed toward it and through its entrance, not truly seeing that above the entrance was a giant structure covered by green moss and multiple veins that looked like to be a temple. Soon the black blurs appeared near the entrance, and the figures, clearly shown as males, looked toward each other and gave a subtle nod before they disappeared into the entrance as well. However, what a rare few knew on that night when the Rakuto faced down the terrifyingly powerful Juubi, a beast that even with the Rakuto's level of power, many found hard to even hurt, let alone defeat, hard to believe. However, before the Rakuto had even faced the Bijuu, it had already come into contact with a rather unassuming little village high up into the mountains, attacking it and tearing apart while ravaging the countryside. Its destructive attacks had nearly obliterated the entire mountain and devastated the countryside, and it would have done more damage had it not been stopped by something. Legends speak that before the Juubi could destroy the mountain, something had impacted with the beast as it howled in such anger and pain that echo across the lands before it was seen flying off the mountain by whatever had slammed into it. The Ridid girl, upon entering the strange cave, didn't stop her running as she kept looking over her shoulder, where to her increasing fear could hear the multiple thuds of footsteps following after her. She didn't know where she was going or even seen for that matter, as it was pitch black within, thus running blindly into the darkness. The young girl could only clench her eyes, desperately trying to distance herself from her once upon a time captors. Due to this and being unable to see through the darkness, the young girl grunted when she felt herself run smack dab into what felt like a wall. Not knowing it, her hand seemed to press deeper into the wall as she became worried there was no other means of escape. Then suddenly, without so much as a warning, she felt the ground beneath shift, and then as the sounders of her pursuers got stronger, she fell. Her surprised yelp was silenced when she found herself meeting the cold hard ground like a long lost friend, causing her to grumble as she held her head in pain. That hurt TTE''bane her soft whine echoed quietly which she seemed to notice when her violet eyes opened slightly before they started to get wider in surprise as she gazed around her in surprise and confusion at where she had ended up. Where exactly had she entered? Was the question being asked numerous times, and it was in due cause because before there was nothing more than a dark lanky wet cavern of some sort that she couldn't see inside, nor anything else besides running into some sort of wall in the darkness. But now, everything was different. First of all there was light lit torches hung among the walls and from the ceiling and from the stone pillars. Thus allowing the girl to actually be able to see the extravagant and very old looking tomb of sorts. So stuck in her awe she forgot the trouble she was in and could only look around the room in wonder. Slowly she stood up and walked toward down the hall aligned by the stone pillars looking left and right. The young Redeed saw strange scriptures in symbols she had never seen, nor hoped to even translate, stone carvings of images that merely piqued her interest. What the Juubi didn't know was that housed inside that unassuming village was the noble clan of the Oda, and with it was where the beast had met its match as the heir of said clan was said to have been the one to hurl the Juubi off their mountain and had faced the beast in combat. It was this event which had never been recorded in history, but this was how the downfall of the great Juubi began for the heir had been the one to weaken the Juubi considerably and even scarred the behemoth which made it flee into the Rakuto's territory. To this day not much is known about that battle or of the heir who faced and made the Juubi flee, only that the man afterwards had disappeared off the face of the planet, leaving a field in a sea of blaze, leaving the wreckage of his battle with the demon. It was this reason the Rakuto was even able to seal the Juubi. All because of one man. The young Redeed after walking down the torchlit hall glancing at the strange symbols and carvings along the way, found herself standing below a giant podium which held another stone carving, only this one was different from the rest for it was much bigger than the other being 4 feet in width and 6 feet in length. All off it was a carvings of what looked to be like a giant battle of sorts, with sections changing to other scenes and such. Yet the one thing that stood out was the giant 10-tailed thing with a man wielding a sword with what looked like a drawing of fire surrounding the two. Strangely she felt a small pull when she stared at that lone figure and pulling up her hand, she hesitantly placed her finger on the lone figure which for some odd reason caused her to smile. Boy. I think she's down here. The yell caused her to freeze before she turned around only for her eyes to widen when she found her pursuers entering the hall. Quickly she tried hidden behind the podium and started to think of a way to avoid them. Yet it was to no avail. Found her. One man signaled to his teammates as he found the terrified girl behind the podium, whose eyes wide in fear before they were clenched shut as she let out a pained hiss when the man roughly grabbed her by her hair and pulled her up to show their target was in sight. Yet time seems to have forgotten these events, the sands of the eternal everlasting time spread out to the 4 winds, and soon all this became forgotten through history. As mankind grew from the teachings of the Rakuto they soon started to forget and simply left the stories of all to be nothing more than legends, myths and fairy tales. The man whom faced and had the Juubi flee from him who seemingly vanished from existence was said to have distanced himself from everyone and everything. His clan, his life and even from his time. But now on this stormy night everything will change, the course of history shall be altered and the elemental continent will come to witness the winds of change and the flames of destruction. Smack. You stupid bitch, how dare you do that to us? The man holding a firm grip on the young girl's head shouted, and with the better lighting, one could see he like his teammates had dark skin with all 4 having stark white hair. Their headbands were wrapped around their foreheads with a strange symbol signifying them as Kumogakure shinobi. The Redeed stared down as her cheek stung from the slap, but she was soon found thrown roughly to the podium, causing her to grunt at the pain. However her eyes snapped open when she felt her arms held above her and a hand roughly grabbing her clothes, violet eyes widened before they shot upwards to the lecherously smirking men above her smaller frame. We'll teach you to mind your betters, bitch, because very soon you'll be pumping out children for Kumogakure's future, but I don't see why we can't just get you ready for what's to come, shall we boys? He said, a growing smirk which was soon seen on all the men's faces as they inched closer to the girl's frame. Her eyes only got wider and tears started to build up in her eyes as she started to realize what they were going to do. She screamed when the man holding her down gripped her clothing, ripped off her vest and pulled out a kunai and started to cut off her shirt from the bottom. She could do nothing as her shirt was cut in between to show her still developing body to the hungry lustful gaze of these men. She was powerless as she started to pull off her pants, the fear of what was to come was building up inside her and the thought of being raped and defiled by these bastards made tears fall from her eyes. In but a few seconds she was in the tatters of her shirt as her pants was pulled her knees leaving her in chest to be seen where her breasts were wrapped in restraining bandages while below she wore simple panties which were about to be pulled off by these lecherous shinobi. When she felt their fingers getting to her panties her shot wide open and slowly she let her tears fall, salty hot tears fell splashing against the podium. Slowly and steadily she spoke in a hoarse desperate whisper which only got louder by the second. SS someone help. Her words were small, meek and under her trembling words, alerted the shinobi before her who just smirked at her desperate whimper. Leaning down he firmly grasped her chin and made her look his way. No one's gonna help you bitch, so just loosen up and enjoy it. Before he smacked her again, causing her face to roll to the side, where her eyes brimming with tears soaking the podium stare out lifelessly as she just awaited the pain to come. She knew in reality there wouldn't be out at night to hear her scream, but she just hoped and prayed it would work. She closed her eyes and, just as the sound of them pulling down their pants, crack. The crack sounded small as it was Kushina heard it, but it was soon followed by an intense rumbling which shook the entire room, causing the shinobi to falter in what they were about to do. The podium Kushina was on started to rumble and, with it the torches along the strange tomb-like chamber blazed upwards before something caught their eye behind them. They saw the floor started to move upwards, separating into stairs leading upwards to what looked like a second level of the chamber. They could only watch as the floor changing into a staircase stopped at the second level, yet the rumbling didn't stop as they all looked up to see a giant slab of the wall started to slide to the left to show something that made the Kumanin's eyes widen and Kushina's violet orb see as best she could at what was behind the wall. It was a throne, a perfectly golden throne crafted by in such design that it was only fit for that of a noble of the highest stature. The arms rests of said chair curled upwards in the form of two dragon heads with their jaws wide open. Snaking upwards, the wings of a dragon spread out from the top of the throne with its wingspan spreading outwards to be at least 3 feet in length. Finally atop the headrest of said throne a giant emblem of what looked like a flame which seemed to be crafted suitable to be the signature piece for the throne itself. However, this was all taken in the span of a few seconds, for it was the person sitting on the throne that had their attention the most. It was a man sitting peacefully on the throne, leaned back against the giant seat of power. One arm on the armrest while the other was holding up the man's face resting against the knuckles of his left hand. His eyes were closed while the steady rise and fall of the man's chest that he was as hard as it was to believe was asleep of all things. However, his clothing was strange to say the least. One could only think he looked like some sort of priest with his robes, as his clothing consisted of a white and red kimono with cherry blossoms adorning the neck and sleeves of his kimono, a very old sign of someone that was of royal birth. Beneath it, he wore traditional Sashinuki Hakama pants which were gathered at the man's ankles, creating a sort of balloon effect. His footwear consisted of, instead of the normal sandals they were accustomed to, were a pair of flat-pointed ankle-high boots. On his left shoulder was a spiked cauldron which was connected to a jet black cuirass, whereas a small black crest with the design of a golden pattern, shaped to be of a bird's nest or of a flower. On his right shoulder another black spiked pauldron was seen, however it was more full body as it covered most of the man's right shoulder. Finally, around the man's waist was a long flowing golden sash uniquely tied around the man's waist, where at the ends it was decorated in black with flame-looking designs intricately embedded into the fabric of the sash. However, it was when they heard a small almost quiet sigh escape the man caused the shinobi to snap their heads upwards to see the man's face. Spiky golden hair was evident, for that was the first thing they saw. A long golden mane of spiky golden locks fell from the mysterious man's head, 2 long bangs framed the sides of his face, and the rest covered his ears and fell past his back. His skin was a unique tan, his face carried sharp features with a sharp jaw and sharp eyebrows. His face was undeniably handsome, and his unique features were evident that he didn't look like a local of any nation they had seen with those characteristics, but Kushina, who could barely see much of the man, felt her hope rising. Especially when the man's arm twitched as his eyes slowly shifted, thus causing the shinobi to tense up. An uneasy silence followed as the man let out another sigh before his face crunched up slightly. Finally the man's eyes started to open up and thus they reveled a dual pair of unfocused azure orbs, glazed over with years of untold amounts of experience and void of any innocence, Long Sing Forgan. He blinked his eyes slowly 1, 2, 3 times before they started to focus outwards, in which they scanned the tomb before him, before they quickly fell upon the scene before him. It was as if a light was turned on as the man's eyes became extremely cold, soulless, as if they pierced into the souls of all those that were unfortunate enough to fall under his gaze. And right now those in his gaze were the 4 rather unlucky and unnerved Kumo nin. Because they were rooted on the spot by the man's unnatural gaze, they felt a cold shiver crawl up their spine as the stranger merely straightened his body and, all the while gazing down, the 4 stood up from his throne. I imagined to find myself in an empty tomb when I awakened, but to find myself before 4 men about to commit the greatest act of defilement in my temple. That cannot be forgiven. His voice was hoarse and deep from years of silence, yet it was baritone with a great regal tone that nobles only dreamed of achieving. Bones not used in ages popped and cracked as he stood, his kimono swayed from the action, but he merely waved it off as he stood to his full height, which was an impressive height of 6'3". His long hair fell past his waist, whilst he merely stared at the group for a moment before his soulless gaze fell upon the shocked and clearly traumatized girl laid out on the stone podium. It was for only a second before his gaze returned back to the 4 Kumo shinobi and, with it, his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Raising his hand, the strange man merely pointed out, "Defilers of my temple perish," he spoke, ending his tone with a stoic command. The shinobi blinked before one of the four shook himself out of his state to speak out against this clearly deranged in their eyes man with a sneer. "And who are you to tell us what to do, freak? Why don't you come down here?" And he never got to finish. As the blonde man seemingly materialized in front of, pointing his index finger on the man's forehead, his cold monotone gaze staring solely into the man's slowly widening black ones. The others soon only noticed his presence when the him up top vanished in a wisp of wind and hearing the surprised grunt from their teammate. The mysterious man's voice came out in a lazy drawl, but it held such cold hard authority that they were left frozen in their tracks. "Did I give a worm such as you to permission speak? No, I did not. I told you to perish, defiler." As he said this, the man's index finger with blinding speed thrust his finger through the man's forehead and directly into his skull, where blood was already pooling out at the injury. The injured man could only grunt and whimper as the man's finger pierced through his skull-like tissue. "Now begging from sight, you worthless trash." As he said this, smoke started to come out of the man's forehead and his eyes widened in sheer mind-searing pain. This time he screamed, "Ah. My head, what are you doing?" the Kumo nin screamed and bellowed as smoke started to rise from his forehead, slowly followed by his ears, eyes and mouth. A wet splotch sounded as the blonde man plucked out his finger, throwing the remaining blood from his finger. His gaze bearing down on the smoking man, whom fell to his knees from the sheer pain, was in all the while gripping his head. "What did you to Hiyoru? Answer us." Another demanded but was effectively ignored as the blonde just watched as the man screamed more and more in agonizing pain. His voice became more hoarse than before. The man's once dark skin started to turn blood red and, without so much as a second later, the man snapped his head upward and let loose a soundless scream, and what they saw terrified the Kumo nin on the spot. Their teammates' eyes were melting where it fluids trailed down into the man's open mouth, where his tongue, teeth and gums started to melt as well, teeth and all. His crimson skin suddenly combusted into a humanoid-sized dark red flame, where his hair had instantly been burned away, leaving a bald head where the skin was burning away. The man lit ablaze, merely tried to reach out desperately for anyone to help him as he burned from the inside out, empty eye sockets and mouth open in an everlasting painful scream, tore into the Kumo nin as they backed away from their teammate. Not able to find anything, the man whose skin was completely gone left nothing more than his skeleton organs, and all were gone with not even ash remaining, and yet even then the fire surrounding the skeleton did not dissipate. Even as the skeleton fell to the ground, it continued to burn, where it slowly turns charcoal black before the bones started to burn away into nothing. Finished with that one, the blonde man turned his gaze to the others and spoke, "Now for you three." The man's cold words caused the three now terrified Kumo nin to turn their heads toward the man to see his azure orbs piercing them down in all their glory. It pinned them down even as the death of their teammate happened before their eyes. Azure orbs glowed with an unnatural light, cold soulless blue orbs held them down as he advanced upon them. Desperately, one stabbed his knee with a kunai to try and temporarily shake his paralyzed body to make it function once more. Then, doing a set of hand seals, the Kumo shinobi yelled out, "Take this, you freak. Raiden. Kaminari Yari." And with a release, a giant lightning-shaped spear shot toward the blonde man at lightning fast speeds. The blonde, however, just stared as the attack came closer and didn't bat an eye when the attack slammed into him, creating a small explosion within the tomb, which surprisingly held from explosion. The Kumo nin, with his other teammates broken from their paralyzed state, warily looked into the smoke to see if the man whom killed their teammate seconds ago was truly dead. Only to be shaken to their core when the blonde merely stood there unscathed, unharmed, as the attack clearly slammed right into him, yet it had not left a single scratch. His kimono waved in the slight breeze as he merely stared at the three with a look of impassiveness that is before he seemed to just vanish before materializing before the shinobi that attacked him and, without so much as a blink, grabbed the man by his face and lifted him off the ground, feet too hovering off the ground as well. The shinobi tried to desperately escape the man's iron grip yet failed due to the steel-like grip he had on him and could only mutter out a few muffled words. "What are you?" He spoke before he closed his eyes when the grip on his face increased twofold as the blonde merely gazed at him as if he were nothing more than an annoying gnat. "Nothing you shall concern yourself with, defiler, now perish from my sight, fool." Saying this, he took his other hand, plunged it into the man's lower abdomen, causing the attempted rapist eyes to widen before he started to scream, which were muffled by the man's hand. He could feel his hand digging through his body, piercing his flesh and crushing his bones as it dug through his body. He could already feel himself lose consciousness when the man yanked out his blood-soaked hand while pulling out his own liver, before he crushed it in his hand, before throwing it aside, before he jammed his hand into his body through the upper torso. Casually, he yanked out his hand once more, and this time he held within his hands the dying man's still bleeding, beating heart veins and all it beat, even as he clenched the vital organ in his hand, which made it beat irregularly. Without so much as blink he let the man go before he slammed the organ into the man's mouth, causing him to choke on his blood, saliva and tongue, before the blonde let him drop to the floor in a puddle of his blood. Then without a second thought he brought his foot upward before bringing it down, crushing the man's skull like a melon, splattering grey brain matter, blood and dung and flesh all over the floor. Without missing a beat he turned to the last two shinobi who at this point were on their knees quivering in fright. Any sense of fighting back was gone and replaced with it was a sense of complete despair as they were coming to find out only now that they were at the mercy of this monster. "Now for you two begging from my sight, become food for the maggots in the soil." Coldly stated he raised his blood-soaked hand and without staining his kimono, he appeared behind the third Kumo shinobi and impaled his hand straight through his chest cavity before he pulled it back and along with it yanked the man's spinal column. Then with the dead man he threw him into the wall unhindered and with a swift turn, he turned his gaze to the last of the four, who by now was on his knees with a dark stain spreading through his pain where a yellow puddle was gathering under the terrified man's legs. Clearly the man was so scared he lost control of his own bladder and soiled himself. The blonde's face frowned in disgust as the man fell to his hands and started whimpering and begging in his own puddle of filth. "DP please SSS spare me. I have a family please DT don't kill me." He pleaded begging for his life like a dog. Once a Kumagakure shinobi now reduced to a mere whimpering man begging for his life in a puddle of his own urine and shit. It was disgusting and it shone on the blonde's face. His soulless orbs narrowed on the man before just pointed his hand toward him and spoke. "Defilers deserve no such mercy, especially those that beg and plead for their lives like cowards. You stink of filth and stain my temple with your disgusting bodily fluids, beggin'." And with a mere wave of his hand an orb of pure fire conjured from seemingly nothing before he hurled it at the man who only screamed as the fireball slammed into him igniting his body and fluids under him in a giant fireball, which started to burn away the stain that in his temple. Not batting an eye the man did the same to the other bodies, letting their bodies burn away as did their skeletons and let their blood boil away into an iron smell of smoke. Seemingly satisfied with his work the blonde flicked his hand throwing the blood, flesh and whatever else that had gathered onto his hand, throwing all of it onto the ground before he turned his gaze toward the young redhead girl who by now was staring at him with wide shocked violet orbs, tear streaks evident on her face, her eyes red and puffy with her clothing in disarray. To the slight confusion of the blonde he saw no fear in the redhead's eyes, only emotions such as awe, shock, admiration and much more. Blinking he merely shook his head before he raised his hand to her face. Then before the girl could speak the blonde spoke one word before she felt her eyes close and she too fell into the state of the sleep. The crack and popping of a campfire could be heard in a small clearing of the forest that was once bombarded by a ravaging storm was now clear with the sky showing the midnight sky while a few clouds floated amongst the sky. The campfire's dim light lit up a small clearing where the animals of the forest kept their distance from the clearing so to not disturb those in the clearing. But because of something else. What that was is anyone's guess. In this small clearing however surrounding the small clearing two figures could be seen. One was laying on the ground, was the same young redhead girl from before covered in the tatters of her clothing, while over her was a cloak. Her soft snores showed the young girl nearly traumatized by early days events was fast asleep. On the opposite end of the fire, the very same blonde who had been awoken from within the temple, sat staring into the campfire. One arm hung over his knee loosely while the other had his face resting against the knuckles of his hand. The blonde's azure eyes stared into the fire for what seemed like seconds, minutes and hours, thinking over what just happened a few hours prior to the present time. "I wonder how much time has passed. Has it been years, centuries or even a millennium since my time? It's been so long yet feels only a day ago I was fighting the 10 tails. I wonder how much has changed." Thinking the blonde let his eyes casually move to the sleeping redhead, the very same who was close to being defiled in his very temple. Without thinking much on it he just took the girl with him after closing his temple off and making sure no one could enter it after leaving it. Now here he was with a girl who had nearly been raped in his temple and in due cause was the reason he was awakened and it was that which made him think on what to even do with the girl. Clearly she was too traumatized to even speak earlier, but now that he had taken her with him, he was starting to contemplate on leaving her when she wakes up. He still needed to learn all that had changed while he slept through the years. MRGHU a grumble made the blonde look toward his guest and he was treated to the side of the young redhead rubbing her head. She pulled herself up from the ground. Luckily the cloak covered her modesty. He just watched as she started to awake before turning his gaze back to the fire. He had no time to partake with the girl much longer as he had to figure out all that's happened. The silence followed until he heard a small voice speak up cutting into the silence like a hot knife through butter. "Ayano sir?" Merely glancing her way the blonde saw the young girl sitting up timidly clenching the cloak around her body. He saw that she was trembling, clearly remembering the incident prior. But she still had the strength to speak to him. Surprising since most women put through such an event raped or attempted upon were nearly broken, but the girl had a surprising amount of willpower. Merely raising an eyebrow in response, the girl's violet eyes looking back at him timidly, she fidgeted slightly when he looked her way, but still she didn't shy away from his gaze. An act he found admirable because most people in his time couldn't so much as look him in the eye for even a second without shying away. Perhaps there was more to this girl than he first thought. "Yes, child," he said as he stalked the flames, causing the wood to pop as the flames rose in intensity. He glanced over to see the young Redeed squirm as she pulled the cloak around herself, how she looked his way with a thankful look in her eyes. "Thank you for saving me," she said, causing the blonde to stare at her for the longest of seconds before he turned back to the flames. "Your gratitude is noted but misplaced, young one. You stumbled upon my tomb, and had your voice not awoke me you would have been defiled regardless." The way he said this made it sound a bit harsh, but the girl seemed to understand. Pulling her knees to her chest, she too gazed at the flames while glancing every so often at her savior. Then she looked his way, causing him to glance her way as she gave a small grin. "Hey Gomen, my name's Uzumaki Kushina, what's yours?" she said, causing the man to glance her way with a raised eyebrow. That is until he gave her a small nod before he looked towards the fire, causing Kushina to frown at his lack of response before she sadly turned to the fire. That is until she heard the man speak. "Oda," he said, causing her to blink as she looked to see him staring into the fire. "My name is Oda Naruto," he said, glancing her way, but seeing as he responded to her caused the young Uzumaki to smile greatly. Still the man's name rung in her ears as she thought about the name. "Mou Oda sounds familiar to me, but I can't remember, but Naruto Maelstrom," she smiled faintly at the name. Why did she like the sound of that name so much? Then she heard the sound of shuffling before she saw Naruto stand from his spot, and because of this, Kushina was able to see an additional accessory on her savior's body. It was a weapon, a katana to be exact. Its handle was purple with the hexagonal designs running the length of the handle being a dark azure. The pommel gold, while the guard was also gold, but it was in a circular shape with a strange dragon-like design running around the guard. His katana was a bit longer than an average katana, but the sheath was pure black and was held in his sash. The strange thing was, as Kushina looked upon the blade, she could literally feel the insurmountable of power leaking off the katana. Still, panic rushed through her veins when she saw the man getting up to leave, and whatever possessed her to speak up came rushing forth. Wait. Where are you going?" she asked, causing Naruto to look her way with his impassive expression. "I'm leaving, I no longer have any reason to stay here and I must find out how long I've been asleep," he said, causing Kushina's eyes to widen. The trauma of the incident before was still fresh in her mind, and being left alone only caused her to feel an intense amount of fear to swell up in her. Plus she strangely didn't want to be distanced from this man who had saved her from being raped because something about him made her want to be by his side. All the same, she quickly thought up multiple ideas before she spoke. "Wait. If it's information you're looking, then I know where you can go," she said, causing him to halt in his step before he looked towards her with an intense gaze. "And that would be?" Here Kushina stood from the ground, keeping the cloak wrapped around her body, and walked up to Naruto with nervous expression. Soon she stood before the man, staring up at his noble features with a serious eye. "Izugakure, in Yuzu no Kuni, and my home. My clan, the Uzumaki, hold the most extensive library in the elemental nations. If anyone knows anything you are looking for, it would be in my clan, and I'm sure they would help you after helping me," she said with a grin as Naruto raised an eyebrow. "And why's that?" Though he had a good idea as to what the young Redeed meant. "Because I'm the heiress of the Uzumaki clan and my father is the clan head and Uzukage of our village," she said, causing Naruto to look down at Kushina before he closed his eyes. And for the first time in who knows long, he gave a small chuckle at the girl's underhandedness because she would be getting help to get back home. Well, he would have his first clue to find out how long he'd been gone from the world. He had to admit she was a very smart girl despite her young appearance and intellect he could respect. "Very well, I'll take you home, but you must have me meet with your father," agreed. He ate, causing the young girl to give a thumbs up with a grin. "You bet, Tebane." This time Naruto's eyebrows rose as Kushina went silent before she found him looking at her with a perplexed expression before her face went beet red at her slip up. Her hands went to her mouth, but the damage had been done. "Tebane," he said, testing the word, but this just caused Kushina to sink further into his cloak to hide her beet red face from his questioning gaze. "Great, I just had to let it slip out in front of Naruto-kun." "Wait, where did kun come from?" 1 week later, Nanamushi. Kushina had to admit after traveling with Naruto for the past week from between the borders of Kaminari, no Kuni and Shimo, no Kuni had been both a very enlightening experience and a nice change of pace. Because for one, she wasn't surrounded by bodyguards of Yuzu shinobi or those Konoha shinobi that had failed in letting her get attacked by Kumo. She was only walking side by side Naruto, and it was nice. She couldn't exactly put it into anything else but that it was nice to have traveled with the ever-silent Naruto. His company had been something she found to be extremely grand to have because he didn't ignore her or played off her words because she was a child. However, he also didn't give off the impression that he was a bad person. In fact, if she was honest with herself, she felt a lot safer in his company than anyone else. This thought process was only strengthened by the fact that as they traveled, some would-be bandits threatened Naruto. But within then the blink of an eye, Naruto kept walking as they all fell to the ground with puncture wounds in each vital area. They had even come across a few Nukenin, but Kushina was once again awed at the speed and power Naruto used to dispatch them. The fact of the matter was that Kushina had learned that she on Soe base level felt more at peace, safe and much more comfortable with Naruto than she ever had with anyone else. However, she did learn a few things about her savior from what little she could learn, that is. One of those things was that Naruto always carried an air about him that was fit for a man of noble status, but not one of those snobbish daimyo she had seen, but a man that had earned his status through blood, sweat and tears. The very atmosphere he gave off caused many of the people they had passed through the small villages to gaze upon him in awe. Some had even lined up to just see Naruto passing through because in their minds, they thought he was some kind of noble daimyo from a foreign country. But Kushina found it a bit annoying to her that women always gave him heart-struck looks, gazes and expressions that just annoyed her to no end. She didn't know why it did, but it did, and she had to hold back a growl each time she saw a woman swoon at the sight of him. However, the most interesting thing she'd learned was that through all the confrontations with bandits and Nukenin, she never once seen Naruto unsheath his katana. Something she found to be strange because he merely used his speed and strength to puncture, disrupt or crush vital organs or areas in each person's body. However, from what she'd seen of his abilities, Naruto had a very great control over fire, so great in fact that he didn't even use a hand sign or utter a word and just willed it to his fingertips and it came as if beckoned by its master. It was honestly one of the coolest things she had ever seen. Nonetheless, the Redeed found herself and the blonde-haired Oda walking through the port town of Nanamushi off the border of no Kuni. And like usual, she could see a lot of people staring at Naruto with shock, awe, and surprise as the two walked towards the docks. Gotten used to it already, Kushina ran forward before she grasped the bars to hold herself up so she could see the open ocean. Her eyes closed as the soft breeze of the ocean rushed past her face, causing her red hair to flow in the breeze. Her eyes opened to see in the far distance to see the island which was her birth land. Feeling someone walk up at her side, she looked to see Naruto looking out at the sea with an impassive face, but she could see his eyes looking out amongst the ocean. "Tell me, Naruto-kun, what do you think of the ocean?" she said, after having let it slip a while back. Kushina had been embarrassed at letting it slip. However, seeing as he hadn't showed any dislike for the suffix, she kept giving it to his name. Naruto just looked at Kushina before he gazed out at the ocean as a strange expression came to his face and one Kushina couldn't decipher. The ocean is vast and unpredictable, but it is what makes humans think of the greatest of freedom, and that is to go out at sea. That way they never feel restricted by land and can experience true freedom without laws or restrictions to bind them. However, the same can't be said for its polar opposite in the elemental cycle, he uttered. Kushina stared at him, drawn in by his words and the amount of truth they held, but the last bit caused her to frown because he'd barely spoken loud enough for her to be unable to hear him. "Nevertheless, let's be going," he said, making her nod, and thus the two went towards the dockmaster to rent a boat. So we find the duo in a transport ship where Kushina was happily staring out at the open ocean and to where Yuzu no Kuni was coming clearer to see. Naruto on the other hand sat with his katana leaning against his shoulder well placed in between his legs. His stoic eyes looked upon the ocean until his eyes fell upon something that caused his eyes to narrow. In the far distance he saw a giant storm building up in the far west. He continued to gaze out at the storm until his eyes picked up the slightest hazy shadows in the far horizon. He decided to not comment as he looked back to see the driver expertly bypass the field of savage whirlpools, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow, that is until he saw Kushina excitingly stare out at the island that was coming closer, causing him to grasp his katana as Kushina quickly pulled on his hand. Paying the boat driver, he let the young Redeed pull him along as if she knew the entire island like the backside of her hand. Seeing who she was, it wasn't much of a surprise really. Still, he felt his katana tremble before he grasped in his hand as he looked out to the west. Izushigakure Gates. And here we are. Kushina shouted with her arms spread out to reveal her home in all its glory, and the blonde had to admit the village was truly a marvel in architectural design from what he could see from the hilltop. The buildings stood high in the sky with strange and unique whirlpool insignias among the walls. Some of the roof on the buildings truly did look like spiraling cones in the shape of a whirlpool. The gates from what he could see stood at least 50 high, while the arch had a blue tile roof. The gates themselves looked to be made of the thickest and durable of wood. On both sides of the gates the Uzumaki insignia could be seen, while in the center of the gate was a strange yin-yang symbol that connected both gates. "So what do you think?" Kushina said, causing Naruto to look at her before nodding. "From what I see so far, it is quite an interesting village," he said as he and the Redeed walked towards the gate. "Halt." The two perked up when they saw a squad of shinobi appeared in a swirling mass of water. Once they were revealed, it was a squad of 5 shinobi all armed to the teeth. Their uniform consisted of black shinobi sandals, black shinobi pants with a mesh shirt on their torso, which was covered by a long-sleeved t-shirt, while over this, they wore a type of black and red chainmail leather chest guard. Over their forearms were leather arm guards with steel plating. Finally wrapped around their foreheads was the red headband with a steel plate, having the Uzumaki insignia etched into the metal. However, the one thing Naruto noticed was that all 5 of them had red hair, maybe not the same shade as Kushina's, but every one of them had red hair. It's probably a trademark for all Uzumakis to have red hair of some kind, Naruto thought. Before he saw the leader of the group tense OC, he saw Kushina standing at Naruto's side. "Hey Kushina-sama. What are you doing here? We thought your father sent you off to Konoha by now, and who is that man with you?" The man said, and while Naruto kept up a stoic face, he was impressed when he saw Kushina put up an impassive expression as her eyes narrowed. "All will be explained soon, but you must take us to see my father," she said, causing the squad to tense, but once the leader seemed to get a hold of himself, he gave a nod. "Very well, we shall have you both escorted to Uzukage-sama," he said, but the look Naruto got from the man clearly spoke of the distrust he held for him. Naruto merely shrugged it off before he followed Kushina as the two were led towards the gate. He watched the 2 gatekeepers did a few hand signs before put their hands on both sides of the gates. He watched as the spot where their hands glowed bright white before white light spread out to the gate in an intricate web before it encircled the entire gate as 2 white lines connected with the 2 Uzumaki insignias, causing each one to flash white and black respectively. From there, one line came out to be pure white while the other was pitch black. The 2 lines followed through the gate until each connected with both sides of the yin-yang symbol, causing it to glow black and white. Then the unlocking sound erupted before the gate started to open with a big rumble to reveal Uzushiogakure in all its glory. And what Naruto saw caused his earlier comment to only strengthen once he saw the magnificent marvel he saw. The village was built in the center of the island, with its giant walls surrounding the entire perimeter of the village. However, a river could be seen in the middle of the village with a number of bridges going over it. Naruto looked to see 2 gates built in both walls on opposite ends of the river that let the water flow in from the ocean and through the other end without harm the village itself. Looking out as he and Kushina walked over the bridge, he saw the many villagers happily enjoying their day as children ran among the streets. He saw all of the populace bearing red hair, signifying that the entire village was indeed the Uzumaki clan was an entire village. He looked further to see among the tall buildings to see at the very far end another building that stood about 60 foot high, while the roof had 4 stone arch going in to hold a giant stone circular tablet of the Uzumaki insignia out to all for the village to see. All in all, it was very interesting to see how far things have changed since his time. "Oh my kami. Look, is that Kushina-sama?" A villager shouted, causing other villagers to look and see her and Naruto walking with a squad of Uzu shinobi at their front and back. "Hooray. She's back." Another one celebrated, which was followed by a few others. "But who is that man with her? Is he a daimyo?" Another said as he eyed Naruto suspiciously whilst a woman beside him looked upon Naruto with a dreamy expression. "He certainly looks like one, I mean he's so handsome," she said, which was met with plenty of agreements among other women. Through this, Naruto felt someone slide their hand in his, causing him to look and see Kushina gripping his hand in hers as she walked alongside him. He raised an eyebrow as she inches closer to his side, and he looked to see the many villagers looking at this sudden move with surprise or shock. He even saw some guards to hold a bit of surprise at Kushina's move. Still, he gripped her hand in his own as the two strolled towards the Uzukage tower. Honestly, Naruto didn't know what was wrong with Kushina, but after traveling with the excitable Reed had made him gain a soft spot for her. He had no idea how long he'd been asleep, but having Kushina as his company was possibly one of the better things that's happened since he woke up. He could feel her unease from touching her hand, and it made him frown, so he gripped her hand, causing her to do the same. Uzukage Tower. "Now once we open the door you will go see to Uzukage-sama, but remember to pay your respects, outsider." The leader of his squad said, only for Naruto give him a stoic stare. Seeing as he got no other response than that, the man gave a grunt before he knocked on the door. "Come in." Opening the door, the man stepped aside, letting Kushina walk in with Naruto behind her as the door closed behind him. Once it did, Naruto was showed the side of this Uzukage he'd heard about. He looked to see that it was a man adorning white and light blue robes, with the ends of his sleeves and bottom of said robes having waves and whirlpool designs liking the bottom. On his head was a cage hat with the Uzumaki symbol on the front end. The man grasped the rim of his hat and pulled it off to reveal his long straight red hair with a pale complexion. Sharp brown eyes went to Naruto to Kushina, while his mouth formed into a smile. He had a long red beard that fell a few inches down. "Yusum, what are you doing here?" the man said as he stood from his desk, but Kushina went and hugged the man. "Gusan," she cried, causing the man to look down at his crying daughter before he looked up to see the noble blonde-looking man standing a few feet away. He eyed him before he looked back down at his daughter. "Tell me, Yusum, what happened? I thought I sent you to Konoha. "And who is this man with you?" he asked, and Kushina wiped away her tears before she started to explain everything. "I was on the envoy to Konoha, but we were attacked by Kumo shinobi. I panicked when Konoha abandoned me, and I did all I could to flee," she said, but the man's eyes widened at her words and grasped her shoulders. "Wait, they abandoned you?" The man's face grew grim when he saw her nod, and he further listened to her story. Through it all his face went from grim to stone cold at how she had almost been raped by Kumo until the most unexpected help came from the blonde man in his office. To her traveling with the man to come see him. Soon enough Kushina had told him everything and was now looking at the ground whilst the cage kept his face from being seen by the shadows of his head. Soon enough he put a hand on his daughter's head as he spoke. "Yusume, go and see to your mother and sister, I'm sure they would be happy to see you again. We can speak again later, but first let me talk with your friend privately." Here Kushina worriedly looked toward Naruto only to see the blonde-haired man just give a nod before she nodded back before she started to walk away. However, to the Oda's surprise, she gave him a hug from his back. "Thank you so much Naruto-kun," she said, speaking into the fabric of his clothing before she quickly left. This left Naruto with a Uzumaki, and looking back at the cage, he saw the man staring straight at him through the rim of his hat. That's when he saw the man stand up from his desk, walked around it before he was standing a few feet from the noble Oda. "Yusume may have not told me your name out of respect for you, but let me be the first to say here," he pulled off his hat and kneeled on the ground before he planted his head on the ground. "Thank you for saving my daughter." Naruto just stared down at the man before he finally spoke for the first time upon entering the office. "Get up, it is not right for a man of your status to bow to me. Your daughter was just in the right place at the wrong time, and because of this she has awakened me. So if anything I owe her my gratitude, now stand up Uzumaki-san." The cage, hearing the sincerity in the Oda's word, did indeed stand up before he put his hat back on his desk. He stared at Naruto with all the seriousness he could muster. "That may be true, but you're possibly the only thing that has saved her from a life of agony and despair. For that you have my eternal gratitude and that of the entire Uzumaki clan. Still I find that she has grown very attached to you through your journey here," he said with a smile as Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Is that a bad thing?" he asked, only to get a chuckle from the cage. "Oh no, on the contrary, it's a very good thing because I can see that Kushina was truly happy when she came in with you. Happier than I've ever seen her in fact, and that makes me happy. I thought sending her to Konoha to become the next Jinchuriki would be good for her, but it seems I can no longer trust our century-old allies. So I have to count it as a blessing she was returned to us and unharmed at that," he said as he walked towards to the window so he could overlook his village. Remaining silent, Naruto saw the man look back at Naruto with a questioning gaze. "But I have to wonder, what is your name? What did you mean when you said you awakened, and for that matter why come here?" he asked as he poured himself a cup of tea, while causing Naruto give a small sigh before he spoke. "My name is Oda Naruto." Crash. The tea glass fell from the man's limp fingers, causing it to hit the floor and shatter. However, the cage cared not for this as he stared at Naruto with wide, disbelieving eyes. His hands soon started to tremble as his eyes took in Naruto's form, once again looking over every single detail until his eyes found the unique symbol adorning upon his armor. "Oh my kami, I never believed it, I always thought the Oda were myths," the cage uttered whilst Naruto frowned at the vague response he got from the man. "Pardon?" The cage continued to look at Naruto as if he was some form of ghost until he closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. "I apologize, it's just the Odas have been seen as nothing more than a myth, and yet here standing before me is one. I thought the tablet given to us was just a hoax, but it would seem I was wrong," he said, further causing Naruto to frown. "What do you mean by tablet? What do you know about my clan, Uzumaki-san?" he said as he took a step forward, but just as the man was about to speak. Boom. The Uzumaki abruptly stood up as a loud crash erupted from the village, running towards the window he saw on the outskirts of his village to see the forests being destroyed. "What is this?" "Uzumaki-sama," said man turned around as the door to his office slammed open to reveal a panting Shinobi. "Zucho? What's wrong? What's happened?" he said while the man gasped for breath before he got enough to speak a few words. "We're being invaded by Kumo, Iwa and Kiri, sir. Their combined forces have breached our whirlpool defenses and the Kiri forces are already about to sabotage our underwater system," he said, causing the Uzumaki to scowl at the news. Quickly he put Zucho against the wall before he stood up. "I think 3 villages would combine forces just to take us out, but how in the world did they bypass our defenses? To get through them is top secret to only in Uzumaki. So how?" he questioned himself whilst Naruto looked out at front of the village. Narrowing his eyes he saw the smoke getting closer. "Uzumaki-san, worry about that later, let's make a deal, I stave off this invasion for you and in return you tell me everything you know about my clan," Naruto said as he walked towards the door. The Uzumaki looked at the man's back in shock and a bit of disbelief at what he just heard. "Not that I would decline, but how in the world do you plan on stopping he combined forces of 3 shinobi villages?" His answer was given as Naruto glanced over his shoulder to gaze at the cage with a cold soulless look in his eyes. Because the world has not known the power of an Oda until today, and they will soon learn what not only an Oda is capable of, but of what the heir of the Oda clan is capable of doing. You deal with the Kiri forces in your waterways, and I'll deal with the main force. Keep your men inside, and whatever you do stay inside your village. Here he put the palm of his hand on his katana as he started walk out the door. Your village, your clan will not fall today, and with that Naruto departed leaving the Uzumaki to stare at spot Naruto once was. Then he grew a serious expression as slammed his hand on his desk, causing a seal to glow from his desk, then he issued his orders. Code Black. All available forces are to report to the underwater way entrance, Genin are to evacuate the villagers to the shelters. This is the order of your Uzumaki, now go. Removing his hand he snapped his fingers causing his personal guard to appear. Go and see to it that my family is kept safe, and once they're hidden report to the underwater entrance. We shall leave the main force to Oda Dono. He said causing the shinobi look at one another. Hey, are you sure that's wise, Uzumaki-sama? To trust that outsider? The Uzumaki just looked out the window and frowned. If anything, I put my entire trust in that man. Not only has he saved my daughter and the heiress of the Uzumaki clan, but if what he said is true, then we all shall experience the power of an Oda firsthand. After all, who better to enter a battlefield than a man who is directly linked to the god of death itself? He said, stunning his shinobi. He just hoped Naruto could stave off the invasion as promised. His Ushiagakure edge of the island, Naruto stared out at the sea as a ravaging storm came down upon Yuzu no Kuni. His eyes narrowed as he remembered the force he intercepted once he left the gates. It had been the first strike force which he decimated before wiping out the other shinobi hiding out in the forests. And now he stood on the sandy shore looking out at the ocean, only instead of the sapphire blue waters from before he saw the entire ocean was a nightmarish black as the shadows of hundreds of ships sailed his way. Smoldering azure orbs lit up as Naruto flicked out his katana, causing the ground beneath to instantly to light up in a pillar of fire. The sand beneath him started to melt into molten lava as Naruto unsheathed his katana with the blade gleaming as a dark red aura glowed from the blade itself. He eyed the blade with a look of content. It's been too long, old friend, now let's deal with these children, but first. Here he stabbed the blade into the ground while he placed his palm on the pommel, causing the blade to be engulfed in flames. Kashmiki then instantly the flames engulfing his hand and the blade dug into the ground before it separated in two lines that soon started to encircle the entire land of Yuzu no Kuni. Once it had done so, Naruto walked over the red line before he wrenched the blade from the ground. This caused a spark which made the red line literally erupt into a giant wall of red flames which soon followed the red line entirely until Yuzu no Kuni was completely protected by a giant barrier of flames. On the mainland everyone could see the phenomenon as the entire land was surrounded in crimson fire and ships unluckily enough to hit the shore was incinerated within seconds. Steeping out from the flames, Naruto strolled out onto the water, katana in hand with his spiky blonde hair waving in the heat waves produced by his flames. His piercing azure eyes stared upon the hundreds of ships of Kumo, Iwa and Kiri shinobi before he clenched his katana, causing it to be engulfed in dark red flames. Now let's see what the sons and daughters of the Rakuto are capable of, and then he charged. End. Chapter 1. Repelling the invasion. Higher, that was the one thing the combined forces of Iwa, Kumo and Kiri first saw when they neared the Isles of Yuzu no Kuni. In all their lives they had never seen such an amount of the flames burst forth on a battlefield. Yet when they saw the entire Isle of Yuzu no Kuni suddenly lit ablaze with a giant barrier of dark red flames engulfing the outer edges of the isle, they knew something had gone wrong. That's when they saw a sight that chilled them to the bone. It was a man walking on the water directly out from the flames. Long spiky gold hair billowed in the air as the glow from the flames lit up his noble features for their eyes to see. He looked like some form of a noble, maybe a daimyo, and yet the balanced stroll he gave amongst the hundreds of ships each carrying 100 or more shinobi and the stoic aura he gave off was unnerving. That's when they saw the blade he held at his side engulfed in fire, causing the waters around him to boil from just the intense heat it gave off. Who was this man? Why was he here? And better yet, how did he have so much power? Naruto looked upon the ships coming toward him with the intent to reach Yuzu no Kuni, and those that got past him were instantly incinerated by the flames of his barrier. His eyes scanned the vast ocean before him to see the number of ships until he let out an exhale. He brought up his katana, and as he stared at his weapon engulfed in dark red flames, letting its beautiful glow smolder in his azure eyes. How long has it been since I experienced your flames? Too long it would seem, he said as he gazed outward. Nevertheless, let's get rid of the trash. Bringing up his katana, the flames instantly vanished as he sheathed the blade. However, as he gripped the blade he planted his foot forward and spoke. Tatsum. Nadajiri, and just before the first ship could come into contact with his body, Naruto moved, pulling out his katana he swung, and the next second Naruto was walking toward the next wave of ships, and just as he sheathed his katana. Flick. Crash. Ah. The shouts of dying shinobi sounded just before the first wave of ships were instantly sliced in half, along with the entire ocean. It was as if a giant blade had come down upon them as a giant slash went down on multiple ships, slicing them completely in half, along with any shinobi in contact were pulled into it as well. Those that weren't were pulverized as their respective ships were crushed as the ocean itself split open, swallowing them whole, as they were crushed by the 1,000 gallons of seawater coming down on them. The Oda paid no attention to this however, as he went towards the second wave of ships. His Azures stared down the next row of ships with little to no emotion whatsoever. The shinobi on the other hand could only look on in horror from their own ships at what just transpired. To see their first battalion of ships decimated with a single attack was mind-blowing, and all from just one man. One Kumo nin could only stare as the noble-looking man walked toward them. "What is he?" he uttered just before he saw his commander walk toward the edge of the ship. "It matters not what he is. He is an obstacle in our path and as such must be taken down, and as commander of the 2nd Battalion I am issuing a full offensive attack." And with the order given he along with the shinobi aboard his and the second row of ships jumped from the ship and dashed toward Naruto. Said blonde merely watched as the hundreds of shinobi jumped ship and charged his way. Though he didn't give much of a flinch at the sheer number, he raised an eyebrow when he saw a few two-hand signs, and with the final one complete, he saw 3 shinobi jump up from the charging shinobi. Raiden. John. The first shinobi before he unleashed a bolt of lighting from his hands toward Naruto. Oden. De Sekiruk. Iwa Kunoichi shouted, causing a giant dragon of earth to erupt from the water from the seafloor before it rushed towards the stationary Oda. Suiton. Sushma. A Kirin declared before his cheek swelled up before he released a giant vortex of water which gained in strength from the ocean as it hurled itself toward the blonde. But the 3 jutsus coming down on him, the blonde merely glanced their way before he looked back at the shinobi. "If this is all you can do then I am sorely disappointed." His words confused them until Naruto put out his palm to the 3 jutsus and only uttered a single phrase. Akad number 8. Siki. Boom. The shinobi could only watch in slight fascination and horror as a transparent blue orb appeared at the palm of the blonde's hand before it grew in size. Then as the jutsus collided with it they were not only blocked but they were repelled back to the shinobi. The shinobi in the area reacted in time to jump out of the way, but some were not as lucky as the jutsus hit them while colliding with a few others. What was that? A shinobi said only to freeze when he felt an oppressive presence come up from behind him. He turned around only to see Naruto's azure eyes staring him down. Soon an immense pressure started to come down on them all, causing some to fall to their knees as a red glow started to surround the Oda's body. "There's no time for second guessing in war, boy. Now perish from my sight." And before they knew what happened next, the blonde flicked out his katana, causing an intense amount of flames to engulf his blade before he sent out a wave of fire upon them all. The giant wave of fire pushed forth, incinerating all in its path, pulling in the ships too close in proximity of the wave of fire. As his robed form billowed out from the intense heat waves, Naruto narrowed his eyes as he saw the next row of ships come crashing through the fiery ruins of the second. However, among them his eyes caught 2 shadows jumping from the ship and then the blonde stepped to the side. Splash. "Well, you're very fast to dodge me, that's for certain," a man commented, causing Naruto glance at his side to see his latest attackers. It was 2 men, with one of them being a very tall dark-skinned man with a very well-defined muscular build. His eyes were a unique shade of green-colored irides, white sclery, and with no defining pupils to show. He had dark blonde upper back-length hair with a black bandana covering the top of his hair and with a shoulder-length beard to match. He wore the standard Kumagakure distinctive shoulder strap flak jacket with no clothing underneath. Tied around his waist was a thick rope, while on down, he wore black pants and black shinobi sandals. The second man was completely wrapped in gray bandages with only his unique violet-colored eyes and nose visible. He wore a dark blue headband with no distinctive markings for all to see. Strapped to his back in a X formation was 2 swords, while over his bandages chest was a Wagakure chest guard, while over his left arm was a distinctive black sleeve. He wore no shoes. Eyes for his feet were also bandages heavily. Naruto rose an eyebrow as he sensed the power from the 2 were easily much higher than the shinobi he faced prior. He turned toward them as the 2 stood a few feet from him and he looked from the tall man to the bandaged one with an impassive gaze. "It would seem we were misinformed," Reikage, the bandages man said as he prepared himself whilst he warily eyed the noble-looking man who at first glance looked powerless, but after seeing the destruction here he was right to be cautious. The man called Reikage seemed to give a scoff as he too eyed Naruto with a frown, even as his aura lit up with the aura of lightning. "But we have, it would seem, either we've been tricked or that old monkey didn't know that there would be a man of this power among the Uzumaki," he said just before he and the bandages man tense when Naruto placed his hands into the sleeves of his robes as he stared the 2 down with a quirked eyebrow. Though he kept their words noted down in the back of his head, he would focus on these 2 for now. "Are you 2 quite done?" he asked in a casual manner, and seeing that they had went silent the Oda seemed satisfied. Good, we're in a war, and words mean nothing on the battlefield, except for the names of those that I deem suited to at least meet me in combat, so tell me young warriors, what are your names? He said, causing the two to share a tense glance between one another before they looked back at the blonde. Very well, I am the Sandame Reikage Z. The dark-skinned man introduced himself before his body lit up with bolts of lighting engulfing his body as his hair spiked outwards. I am the Nidame Tsuchikage, MK, the bandaged man said before he got into a crouch. His hand soon started to glow a transparent white. Naruto easily took in the two titles' names before he gave a nod. Good. And before the two cages knew what happened, the blonde vanished. What the Z sputtered just before the blonde appeared right in front of him, and before he could react the blonde slammed his first fist into abdomen. Then pain, untold amounts of pain erupted from Z's abdomen, causing the oxygen within him to burst out from his lungs as his eyes popped open in shock. He quickly jumped back from the man as he stared at Naruto's fist with shock. Such strength. He bypassed my rate no Yoroi, and even then it felt as he broke a few ribs he thought in surprise, before he glanced up to see Naruto look down at his hand. I felt a slight tingle he commented just before Mew appeared above him as he unsheathed both swords upon his back. Then he swung intending to cut off the Oda's head, but the blonde was a step ahead of him as just ducked before he grabbed his sheath before he slammed the butt end of his sheath into Mew's abdomen, causing him to grunt. Then once he touched the water's surface, he swirled around the blonde so that he was standing side by side with Z. I wonder how he's faring, Z said as rubbed his abdomen to ease his aching ribs, and yep, he could feel a few ribs were broken from that single punch. He winced a bit as he and Mew eyed the blonde man with a more in-depth gaze. DCH hopefully he dies, Mew uttered with a small scowl of annoyance, whilst Z just gave him a blank stare. And you for one set aside your differences and work together? He said, and just before Mew could respond they both found a shadow hovering above them, causing to look up to see Naruto staring them down. I don't believe you have the time to talk amidst a battle, Shy Mew cursed. Boom. Uzumaki waterways. Your family has been safely hidden away, Uzukage Dono the shinobi said Kage said as they appeared at his side. Behind said cage was the entire shinobi force of Yuzu no Kuni. The Uzukage himself just gave the shinobi a nod, whilst he looked forward a narrowed gaze from the rim of his cage hat. The waterways of the Uzumaki were a system built to filter the water from the ocean that went through Yuzu no Kuni through the village. It was their main power supply as the tides generated from the ocean and the whirlpools that surrounded Yuzu no Kuni always came through this one river which they used as a form of hydropower. With numerous amounts of tide mills installed along both the entrance and exit of both waterways, they generated a good amount of electricity for just the village itself. It was their main source of power for the village's electricity, but it was also a very good place for a potential enemy to come in through. However, no one knew of the entry points besides those who laid the foundations of Uzumaki, the Uzukage, and the clan heads. The Uzukage frowned at where his thoughts were going. The evidence was becoming more and more obvious to who the traitor was. First, Konoha abandons his daughter in the midst of a Kumo ambush. Second, the only ones to know the secret of bypassing the whirlpool surrounding Yuzu no Kuni were fellow Uzumaki with a lick of true Uzumaki Fuinjutsu, and Konoha had an Uzumaki already in their village. However, he found it near impossible for her to ever relay that information to them. Third and last of all was as he was staring at the forces of Kiri coming out from the entrance of the waterway was how their secret entrances were being compromised. Konoha didn't know them, and yet they were the most likely suspect to betraying them after having a near long-century alliance with them, so they were the only ones to know of anything about their village. So what happened for them to get this knowledge, or better yet why betray them now? Never mind that, I'll deal with it later. For now was the Uzukage's thought as he narrowed his eyes upon the man standing in front of Kiri forces who was obviously the leader. I would never have thought we would battle one another, Mizuki Mida, or should I say, Mizukage-san. The Uzumaki clan head said as he stared upon the Mizukage with a studious gaze. Unlike his fellow Uzumakis, he remained perfectly still whilst he looked upon the cage. The man in question smirked. He had a pale complexion with a tall yet slender build. He had relatively long dark blonde hair that was swept back in a combed down style. His eyes were a unique shade of turquoise, while he had a thin mustache with no eyebrow, along with two very prominent lines going down the sides of his mouth. The man wore a long grey robe with a pinstriped pattern, while under this he wore a dark blue full bodysuit, while around his waist was a dark blush sash and black shinobi sandals. Mida's smirk grew in size as he stared back into the cold eyes of the Uzukage. But then again, I never that I would have the honor to face you myself. We came here with all the leaders of our villages to take you and your clan out, but it would seem that honor shall be mine. After all, it's been aspiration of mine to face the man who slaughtered the entire Kagaya clan, am I right, Uzumaki Kenshin of the Shai no Kanshoku? He said, causing the Uzukage to narrow his eyes before he looked to see a Kirinin coming up to Mida. Uzukage Dono, it would seem our path behind us is blocked off by a giant wall of fire. He finished hesitantly, causing Mita to raise an eyebrow before he heard the Uzumaki give a chuckle. It would seem my comrade is dealing with the main invading force. Good, that leaves me and my clansmen the task of dealing with you, and I don't plan you show you a shred of mercy, Mita. And with that said, the atmosphere grew extremely heavy upon Mita as the Uzumaki head shed his robes to reveal his armor beneath it. It was fashioned in the armor from shinobi of old, where the armor itself was pitch black, while underneath he wore a dark red full bodysuit. Over his arms were a pair of arm guards with steel plating, while on his head he wore the Uzumaki headband proudly. With his body revealed, the man stood a good 6'0", with his long red hair falling down his mid-back, whilst his mustache fell just short below his chin. He had a very well-defined muscular build, but not enough to be too bulky to get in the way of his overall strength and speed. Finally etched into the back of his armor was the symbol for the Uzumaki clan. Bringing out his hand, a seal glowed from the palm of his, causing Mita's eyes to widen as Kenshin stared him down. "Now come and face the wrath of the Uzumaki clan," he said before the seal glowed brighter. "Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Rick no HMKM." The seal from his hand glowed before it unraveled from his hand in a mystical glow, as the seal came in a transparent fashion, before it unleashed a giant ball of fire which hurled itself toward Mita and his forces, and this caused Mita to scowl before he brought up his hands, before doing a set of hand seals. Suiton. Miserapa. Breathing in, Mita's cheeks swelled up before he unleashed a giant torrent of water which soon collided with the fireball. HSST. Both attacks dissipated, while the result of the clash soon created a steamy veil of fog which blanketed the entire area. Looking out, Mita narrowed his eyes before they widened when he found Kenshin just sheer inches from him. Cold brown eyes met surprised turquoise before Kenshin merely planted his palm into the Mizukage's abdomen. "And the fight begins, Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Shinjikeha." That's all Mita heard before his abdomen glowed a bright white before a seal formed across his stomach. Then he felt his hearing pop, his vision blurred as his body was propelled through the air by some unseen force. That was the spark that ignited the two forces to collide as both Uzu and Kiri forces charged in a war cry. Yuzushiogakure shelters. The shelters built into Yuzushiogakure were well built into the underground systems of the village itself. Built during the village's construction, it was made specifically for clansmen that couldn't partake in the battle to seek shelter, and in case of an emergency, it had an underground tunnel that would lead them directly under the island and under the sea where it would lead them on the mainland. The shelter itself was one large chamber built in a dome-like fashion to fit for a mass number of people. It was here, however, as the shelter trembled with each earth-pounding force, that most of the Uzumaki clansmen were hidden away. Most of them were the elderly from various ages, while others the rest parents and their children. Among them was 3 other Uzumakis huddled up against the wall. Among the 3 was Kushina herself. The young girl held a frown of worry as the chamber shook. She looked to her side to see the 2 others with her. The first was a girl about her age who looked like her twin in almost everything except for a few differences. Her hair was a bright shade of scarlet red that fell to her mid-back, while her bangs covered most of her forehead with 2 longer bangs, framing both sides of her face. Her eyes were that of a brown shade, and like Kushina, she too wore garbs fit for a kunoichi. She wore the traditional Yuzu kunoichi garb consisting of a red-sleeved shirt which covered her maturing chest, while on the left shoulder, it held the Uzumaki symbol. She wore black trousers that were just below her knees, while on her feet she wore blue shinobi sandals. Finally tied around her right shoulder was the Yuzu headband. This girl was in fact her twin sister Uzumaki Urza, and like her was a genin of Yuzushiogakure, but more importantly the second heiress to the Uzumaki clan. "And I keep telling you we should go out there and fight too," she said, the third person, who merely gave a melodic chuckle. Kushina's sweat dropped a little at her sister's attitude. She probably had the same attitude as her. Then she looked to the third person, an older woman in her mid-30s at least. Her hair was the same shade as Urza's as it fell to her lower back, while a lone bang fell over her left eye, with the end curving slightly, but her eyes were the same shade of violet as her own. This woman had the build of a kunoichi, but motherhood had only enhanced her beautiful features to make her look simply extravagant. Unlike the 2 younger girls, she wore a crimson kimono with white shirt and hakama underneath. The kimono was decorated with a number of flowery designs, while on the back of said kimono was the Uzumaki symbol as well, but the flowery designs all contributed into the swirling vortex of the insignia upon her back. This was Kushina and Urza's mother, Uzumaki Kurara, matriarch of the Uzumaki clan. "You're still a bit too young to go fighting in a war, Urchan," their mother said as she patted Urza on the head, causing her to give a small pout at still being treated like a child. She was a genin, damn it. "Still, it doesn't sit well with me to leave Tucson and everyone else out there while we have to wait here underground," she said. "I know, Musum, but don't forget your Tucson is one of the most powerful Uzumaki in the history of our clan. Besides, he is fighting alongside the clansmen to defend our home, so there is no need to worry, he will be fine," she assured the scarlet-haired Uzumaki, who just sighed at her mother's smile. She just couldn't beat her mother when she smiled at her like that. "Will this place hold though?" Kushina said, commenting on the fact the dome shuddered as another force of power shook its structure. Kurara just kept a smile on her face as she looked upon the dome crafted by their ancestors' hands. "Do no worry, Kushi-chan, this place is the marvel crafted from our ancestors' hands, it is the fruits of their hard-earned labor that created this place. So no small amount of some simple siege will break it, trust me on this," she said with a wink before she gained a mischievous twinkle in her eye when she saw the worried look in her daughter's eye. "Oh, and why do you look so worried, Musume? You know your father is just fine, so could it be about that man I heard about saving you from the Kumo nin?" Kurara's face went positively fox-like when she saw Kushina's eyes shot wide open in shock as her face snapped in her direction, but the way her face went beet red was fact enough. Urza blinked before she eyed her sister in suspicion. She remembered what Kushina told her and their mother on what happened, and she would be lying to not wanting to meet and thank the man who saved her sister. However, to see this reaction from her fellow twin was a surprise to be sure, because she was more of tomboy than even herself, so to see her blush like that must have meant only one thing. This guy had to be special to make Kushina act that way, and because of that Urza wanted to meet him for herself. "Ah-chan," Kushina whined pitifully as she tried to push down her blush, but Kurara just gave a giggle. Still, that didn't mean Kurara wasn't curious to the identity of her daughter's savior, and from what little Kushina said, he was an interesting guy, seeing as he woke up in some kind of tomb. Her violet eyes narrowed when she felt the wall behind her tremble, causing her to close her eyes. There's a foreign energy source on the shores of the island, and whoever it is facing against the full invasion force. Plus the fact the source is facing off against two others with extremely large chakra capacity fit for a cage, this has to be the same man who saved Kushina. Opening her eyes, Kurara let out a smirk as she glanced toward Kushina with a happy expression. "Whoever it is, it seems you've found yourself a very interesting friend, Musume." Kurara Dono. And Yuzu Shinobi came to the woman's side with a nervous expression, causing her to raise an eyebrow. "Yes, what is it?" The man just glanced from the way he came before whispering into her ear. "We have intruders, it seems a toad and snake are trying to infiltrate this shelter," he said, causing Kurara's eyes to narrow before she gave him a nod. "It seems the leaves are trying to shroud its strangling roots." "Very well." With a simple hand gesture, Kurara placed her free hand against the wall behind her, causing a seal to appear before the secret exit was quickly closed off before a great rumbling sounded beneath them. She got many looks from other Uzumaki, but she just gave a serene smile to them all and just answered the unasked question. "Don't worry, just washing away some strays that got caught up in the drain." They all sweat dropped at how sadistic that smile looked. Such a serene expression combined with a smile like that, it had to be breaking laws to have smile like that. Kushina and Urza glanced from their mother to one another and shuddered for a moment. "Ah-chan is scary, but Naruto, this man, is he a demon?" Gyu commented as he and Z stood a few feet away from Naruto. They'd been fighting for a good hour, and yet he nor Z had even landed a single hit on the stoic blonde. Truly, Naruto's body was unmarred without a single scratch on his body, not even his clothing was singed or torn in any place. However, the same could not be said for the two respective cages. When they first started fighting Naruto, they thought somewhere deep in their mind that they had the advantage in number. However, that was blown out the window with how the blonde was easily keeping up with the both of them, fighting them both off with so much ease, it was as if he was fighting off children. Gyu had suffered numerous amount of wounds, causing his bandage's body to bleed profusely. His headband was long gone, whilst his left arm hung limply due to his shoulder being broken. His right eye was closed shut as blood leaked out due to a near invisible attack on the blonde's part that nearly took out his eyes. Luckily enough, it only scarred his right eye, however it was enough to close that eye off. Z, on the other hand, was bleeding from the mouth, while most of his body was overwhelmed with multiple bruises, black whelps and even a few fist indentions in his body. His left arm was completely shattered whilst his abdomen had a sickly shade of purple showing. He put a hand to his chest as he eyed the stoic blonde with a look of caution. "I honestly don't know what he is, and the fires surrounding Yuzu no Kuni have halted the rest of the ships from advancing. Whatever the case, we must keep trying." And Yu could only nod before did a set of one-handed seals. "What else do you have to show for, sons of the sage?" Naruto commented before he saw the bandaged man finish his seals before speaking. "Oten. Shinikseki." And soon the blonde felt a rumbling beneath him before he saw 10 giant boulders rise up from the sea as they surrounded his body, causing him to raise eyebrow. They swirled around him before they shot inward, intent on crushing his body. Giving a sigh, the Oda closed his eyes just as the boulders were closing in. Once they were within range, he flicked out his katana, cutting them all into pieces until bits of earth passed by him harmlessly. Then he heard the sound of lighting from above him. "Raiden. Kuraponsa." Z shouted before a giant panther made of jet black lighting shot down from its skyward position. As it came down, Naruto raised his hand just in time for the panther to come into contact with his palm. "That can't be possible," Z thought in shock as he saw something he thought to be impossible. Naruto was halting the panther in its tracks and guiding his hand, he redirected it back at the shocked Raikage, and being caught off guard by the redirection the man could only pull up his arms as his own jutsu backfired on him. Ah! He grunted as his own attack electrified him whilst Mew just looked on in surprise. Black lighting was a special type of lightning that was said to be extremely volatile to the touch and if not handled correctly, could hurt the user as well even kill them. And yet this one blonde man had not only caught it but redirected it back to the Raikage himself. How he uttered causing Naruto just raise an eyebrow. It's very simple no matter how different it is, lightning is at its very core a simple result of electrostatic discharge and thus I can absorb it into my body and then release it back in a redirection of my choosing before it can cause any harmful effects on my own body. He said as if it was a simple manner of redirecting one of nature's most powerful elements. Mew could only stare in bewilderment and a bit of apprehension at how this man had just explained something that had been in theory for years in a couple of seconds. It was official, this man was extremely dangerous. Naruto just stared at the two before he putting out his palm, causing Mew to tense as Naruto called. Pad number 31. Shakam and soon a bright red orb formed in his palm before he held it and causing it to shrink in size and once it reached the size of an apple, it released a small shockwave causing the water beneath him to ripple. His hand started to glow as he aimed it directly toward the two. There it is again, that's ninjutsu, but so much destructive power, what form of attack is that? Mew thought before the orb shot from Naruto's hand. Thinking quickly he did a few hand seals before he jumped towards Z's body as he activated the jutsu. Boom. The orb glowed white before it unleashed a giant red beam that incinerated everything in its path. Its path swung from right to left, causing the entire fleet of ships hit by it to explode in a fiery blaze of hellfire. It finally dissipated when the blonde released it into the sky, causing it to wisp away in beams of red energy. Idly the blonde looked down at his hand and frowned. Has all my time spent sleeping put a lack of control over my power, or has it increased all these years? A few feet from his location he looked to see you with a slightly recovered Z appearing through the water's surface, but the shell shock faces they wore was plain to see. After all, they'd just witnessed the last of their fleet demolished by one attack, the destruction was there for them to see. At what was once their fleet was now a fiery graveyard of sinking ships, of where once a force of 3 shinobi villages banded together now lay in shambles. That looked like a Biju Uzumaki only on a far more destructive scale. What is this man? Was the thoughts of the Tsuchikage. Z on the other hand regained his footing as stared dead straight at the impassive blonde before glancing at Mew. I have an idea, but you have to keep him occupied. Think you can do that? Mew just looked back at Z for just a moment before he gave a small nod. Though if he was honest with himself, this entire invasion was looking to be a failed operation because the majority of their force was just destroyed. However, there was a new urge growing within him and that was to try and kill this clearly very dangerous man before he was set loose upon the rest of the world, cause if he was. Mew feared for the worst. I'll get him, but make sure whatever you're doing it best be something that can take him out. He said, only making the man just scoff as his right hand started to crackle with lightning. Don't worry, it will. Naruto raised an eyebrow as the two got ready, but he just stood where he was as he waited for them to make the first move. That's when he saw Mew thrown down smoke bombs blanketing the air around them in a black smoke. The Oda merely frowned when his two foes vanished from his sight, and amidst a raging crackling of fire of burning ships and the fire surrounding the island, all went silent for the briefest of moment. Hiding now, are we? Cheap parlor tricks won't work. His ears perked up before he leaned his head to left, dodging a few kunai which hit the water, but his eyes caught sight of a few pieces of paper sizzling before they plunged into the water. Boom. The water exploded from beneath him, causing him to jump to the side, and right then he looked down once he felt the water rumble beneath him. Oten. Ritsudo Tenshim. Mew's voice sounded from within the area before the water itself split open to reveal all the way down the sea floor rupturing. That's the water started to swirl caused by the hole in the sea floor. Shaking his head merely jumped only for his gaze to look up to see Mew above him. I. Fton. Tatapa. He said as he finished a set of hand seals and instantly a giant gust of wind shot down on Naruto pressing him down into the whirlpool, but he just sighed before he vanished from sight. This caused Mew to widen high eyes before he looked around only for him to feel a presence behind him. Be more aware of your surroundings. Before he could react, a fist planted itself into side sending him flying from out of the smoke-filled area. That's when Naruto's eyes widened slightly when he felt a presence come up from behind him. Hirokazuchi. Jigakuzik. Z's voice sounded and Naruto spun around just in time for him to see Z's eyes glaring back at him with his entire body engulfed in black lightning. Boom. The surrounding area exploded in a giant pillar of water whilst a shockwave pulsed outward causing waves to form. Soon enough gravity took its course and the water came back down into a heavy rain, and among that rain Naruto and Z's form could be seen through the heavy downpour. However, something was unusual as Z's limbs seemed to be stretching out toward Naruto's body, and that's when it was fully revealed. I am possible, what are you? Z stuttered out as he stared in complete shock at what he was seeing. It was his right arm stopped in its tracks while his hand was coated in a thick veil of blue chakra and pure black lightning. However, it was the hand gripping his wrist that bewildered him and caused him to glance up to the cold eyes of his blonde foe. Was that your best? Was that all you had? Was all that just to have you try to kill me with this? He said, gripping Z's wrist, causing him to wince as the monstrous grip he had on him. He kept gripping his wrist, causing him to fall to a single knee whilst he gave a grunt of pain. This feeble technique is useless against me, now drown in your failure, child of the sage. And with a twitch of his hand. Crack. Ah. Z's grit his teeth in pain as the blonde let go of his broken wrist. He looked up into the unforgiving azure orbs of his foe with a frown. Now what would you do, I wonder, Naruto commented, only to raise an eyebrow when a pain-filled smirk formed on Z's face. I was afraid of doing this, but seeing as my best technique can do nothing to you, then perhaps his can. He said, causing Naruto to frown. That's when Z closed his eyes and willed lightning into his body, causing his nerve clusters within his arms to twitch before he jumped forward. He wrapped his arms around Naruto's body, causing him to raise both eyebrows before he shouted, "Do it now." Glancing upwards, he saw Mew floating in the air with palms put forward with a glowing white transparent cylindrical-like shape. It grew in size before Mew's eyes narrowed down on the two. Jinten. Genkai Hakuri no Jutsu. And once the cage released, it came down on the two which surrounding them in a transparent cylinder. However, Naruto just narrowed his eyes as the glowing center started to close in on him. So one of the Rakudo's more advanced techniques is known today. It will do them no good though. Azure eyes started to smolder before the epicenter of his eyes glowed an even deeper shade of blue. Soon his body started to give off a deep blue shade much darker than that of Chakra's own color, and soon it came to the point Z's arm started to burn before his flesh caught on fire. If you think this can take me out, then you're sadly mistaken, he said. Let me out, Mew. Z's let go before Mew willed out a small escape for Z, letting him dive into the water as the flames burned and scorned his body, but still Naruto remained at his body started to steam before a flicker of one crimson flame appeared. Then the technique closed in around him with only one phrase being uttered. Jin no Kurmku. Then the technique closed in, however it stopped when a bright red glow erupted from within, causing the technique to implode in a fiery blaze. It soon started to slowly deteriorate particle by particle as Naruto, cloaked in crimson red flames, walked out of the failed attack. Azure eyes glanced up to the wide and fearful ones of Mew before Naruto brought up his hand, brushed it aside, causing the flames engulfing his body to wisp away into the air. How did you? Mew uttered, causing Naruto to just shake his head before he appeared in front of the bandages man. Then his hand struck, grabbing him by the neck in an iron grip and narrowed his azure eyes on him. Fire destroys everything, boy, nothing isn't excluded from this, from the biggest of objects down to the smallest particle. Even dust is something fire can burn. Mew's eyes widened before Naruto threw the cage's body away, causing him to plummet into the water. Then as the two cages started to emerge from the watery depths, they could only look up as Naruto floated from above, causing the Tsuchikage's eyes to widen. Was the blonde able to even fly like him? If this is all the best of this era can offer in terms of combat, then I'm most displeased. He said, putting his arms into his robes and his gaze down on the two defeated cages. His blonde hair billowed in the wind before he spoke again as he addressed them with a cold glare. Perish from my sight. And just as his hand ignited in a ball of flames, but just as he was about to set them loose. Ding. The Oda's eyes narrowed when he felt a tremor in the spiritual realm around him, then he looked to where he felt the source to see it coming from the island itself. Not sparing another glance, he willed the ball of fire from his hand before putting his hand back in his sleeve before he started to walk back to the island with his back to the two downed cages. Leave, I am no longer in the mood to prolong this fight, so if you wish to survive, I suggest you get out of my sight. He said, causing the two to scowl, but just before they left Z had to ask as he eyed the katana on the man's hip. Before we leave, just answer this one question, why didn't you use your katana? He said as he and Mew witnessed the total destruction the man wrought upon their fleet with that single blade. The fire and flames he let off from that blade were at best abnormal, for they were just too strong to be normal, and the intensity they held seemed to even burn the air around them. Naruto glanced over his shoulder before he kept walking. I'm not obliged to answer your question, since neither of you proved to even be a certified warm-up. Now leave before I decide to change my mind. And with that he kept left whilst the two cages vanished from the battlefield. And thus as Naruto walked back to the island, he brushed his hand aside, causing the barrier of fire to dissipate into the air, leaving the island of Yuzu no Kuni undamaged. Looking up at the island, the blonde only had one thing in mind now, to find out what his clan had left behind during his absence. Earlier Kenshin vs Mida. Azuki Mida was really starting to regret ever agreeing to go and invade Yuzu no Kuni. Perhaps it was blind ignorance that led him to believe that if he combined forces with Kumo and Iwa, they would have easily taken Yuzu no Kuni and destroyed Yuzushiogakure without consequence. Perhaps he was arrogant in thinking they could defeat a village, a sole clan that threatened the entire elemental nations without a vast number of casualties on their own side. Or perhaps it was pride that led Mida to believe that he could finally take on the infamous Uzumaki clan and its head without so much as a true severe number of death tolls on his side. Now he was regretting ever agreeing to invade Yuzu no Kuni, because as he was keeping himself barely standing, he had to watch as his most powerful of forces were destroyed before his eyes. Every Yuzu shinobi that fought was easily keeping up and was easily taking out his own men with their Fuinjutsu-based combat, ninjutsu prowess and most of all their effectiveness against repelling Jinjutsu. Mida coughed up a glob of blood before he looked down at his body and winced at how damaged he really was. He could feel fractures in both his left shoulder and right kneecap, his entire body was riddled with wounds due to the unique combat style of his opponent, causing him to bleed profusely. When he heard steps among the fight he looked up to see Kenshin coming towards him, and though the clan head had suffered a few injuries, he still looked ready to go on for much longer. "What's wrong, Mida? Where did your spirit go? Have you finally realized what you've stepped into?" Kenshin said as walked towards him. His armor was dented in a few areas, while a part of the chest was blown off by Mida's Jinkai technique, which thankfully he was able to entrap and seal it before it could cause any further damage to his clansmen or the waterway. However, Kenshin, unlike his foe, was still rearing to go thanks to his longevity from his Uzumaki heritage. His body could endure much more punishment than that of a normal mortal. Even life-threatening wounds couldn't stop an Uzumaki, and that is what made him and the rest of his clan so respected and so very dangerous on a battlefield. As he stopped just a few feet from Mida, he looked down on the Mizukage with smoldering brown orbs that pierced Mida's very soul. "Are you ready to submit and yield defeat?" he questioned Mida, who just narrowed his eyes before he swiped his hand across his chin, getting a droplet of his blood in the process, and then he did a quick set of hand seals. "Not quite." And just as he slammed his hand on the ground he spoke, "Fuchius no Jutsu. Lamaguri." And then a giant poof of smoke erupted, blanketing the entire area, causing Kenshin's eyes to narrow as the waterway's walls groaned and cracked whilst a giant shadow soon started to be seen. Soon enough the smoke lessened to reveal a giant clam plopped right in the middle of the entire waterway itself. The Mizukage stood atop of the summon as he now looked down at his foe with an impassive expression. "Now let's see you get past this, my greatest collaboration jutsu, the Shinkurum no Jinjutsu against you, Uzumaki Kenshin, wielder of the Shai no Kanshoku," he said before the clam opened its shell before it released a vast steam into the area. The Uzumaki head remained impassive before he glanced behind him to see the rest of his clansmen dealing with the last of the Kiri forces, that is until the steam started to flood his vision. The game of illusion. Really, now are you that desperate? Soon enough multiple mirages of Mida appeared around him, each of them finishing a set of hand seals of their own. "Suiton. Tepndama." One of Mida's mirages declared before his cheek swelled before he shot out a ball of water 5 times the size of a regular-sized tree. "Kaiten. Enden." Another shouted before he shot a bullet of fire down at the head of the Uzumaki. "Oten. Directen." The third sounded before a giant dragon's maw formed from the ground before it shot forth. Soon enough more mirages started to appear, and as the jutsus closed in on him, Kenshin just gave a sigh. He knew Mida didn't have fire nor earth affinity, and he was only able to use these other jutsus because he was utilizing his jutsu to its fullest. Since it fell under the yin release, he was able to manipulate the mind to think he could, but in reality it all just an illusion. A very realistic illusion, but an illusion nonetheless. "I'm not in the mood for these games," Mida clapping his hands he man declared. "Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Yuzu o Makikomu." Then weaving his head forth a small rip in the air, formed before it became bigger, until a giant swirling vortex appeared where the inside of it was a pitch black void, less space. The second it started to swirl the steam, jutsus and all started to get pulled in. Well it did. Kenshin slammed his other hand on the ground. "Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Kumanomi." And from there a white spider-like web spread out from his hand which stretched out all over the ground and walls and ceiling. It went further and further as the vortex absorbed the mist that seemed to never end, and soon the white web tensed before it turned crimson. "Thought you vanishing." Kenshin appeared directly above the clam's shell before he slammed his hand on the summon's body, and as his eyes glared down at the surprised Mida he ushered in his next technique. "Uzumaki Fuinjutsu." Hite from his hands a white glow formed before it soon enveloped the giant clam. Before it was glowing white soon enough, the giant clam went poof with its form disappearing from the mortal world and back to its own realm. Landing on his feet, Kenshin didn't give Mida the time to recover before appeared in front of him before slamming his fist into face. Grabbing him by the head before he could fly back, he slammed his face into his knee before slamming his elbow into his ribsage. He reared his left leg before kicking him in the abdomen, sending flying on the other side of the water, way causing him to slam into the wall. "Ah!" Mida puked up blood as he tried to wrench himself out of the wall, only for Kenshin to beat him to it by grabbing him by the scruff of his neck. The Redeed pulled him out of the wall before drop, kicking him to ground causing it to crater, whilst Mida's strangled cry was muffled by the ground. Azuki Mida, Nidame Mizukage, you're lucky I'm only prolonging your suffering. He said as put his foot on the man's head and applying pressure he watched as the man tried in vain to pull his foot off. However, you have information that I want and you will give it to me or I will personally see to it that your village is sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Am I clear? He said as he applied more pressure to his head. Why yes. I get it. Though shameful, Mida didn't feel like having his head pop like a melon under Kenshin's foot. Speak then, how did you, Kumo and I would get information past our defenses who relayed that information? He said as he lightened the pressure. It was Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandame Hokage. He met with all of us and gave us the details of bypassing your defenses. He never gave a reason why, only the details, and in exchange, we would hold a ceasefire with Konoha. He said, causing Kenshin to scowl. His brow went void of any other emotion. He clenched his hand causing his knuckle to pop before blood started to leak from his shaking fists. I see his face went impassive before he let off on Mida before he grabbed him by the scruff of his neck before lifting him up to eye level. Seeing as you've given me what I wanted, I have no further use of you, but killing you would be a mercy. Leave in shame, Hazuki Mida, flee and cling to what you have seen today, at what the Uzumaki are capable of doing. Now get out of my sight, he said before he threw the cage aside, causing him to hit the floor before he regained his footing. He watched as the man stared at him for the briefest moment before he looked to see his Kiri shinobi all slaughtered. His head soon fell in defeat before he used a quick Mizu Shunshin, causing him to disappear into a vortex of water. Seeing him gone, Kenshin looked down at his hands and once he saw the wounds on his hands caused him to give a sigh. So it's true, Konoha has betrayed us, the alliance is broken. Hiruzen Sarutobi got that information from only one source, but she would never hand it over willingly. Add the fact that now makes 4 of the 5 major shinobi villages are our enemy. It would seem the Uzumaki clan will be going to war once more. Then he felt a jolt of pain from his hands, causing him to wince. He'd used his unique ability after so long without much need. After being out of battle for so long, he hadn't felt the need to use the ability, and yet if it could cause him pain from even this battle meant only one thing. He needed to get back in shape. There had been a reason Mida had called him the Shai no Kanshoku or Death Touch, and that was because like every other Uzumaki, each one is born with a unique ability. It was like a mutation in their own chakra. His Musume Kushina was born with the ability to conjure chakra chains, and many others in history had awakened their own unique ability. His other daughter Urza had yet to awaken hers, but he felt it would be soon. However, his was based on touch, or as he liked to call it, transmute his chakra on everything he touched, and after learning how to master it, he was able to combine it with his Fuinjutsu armory without the need for hand seals. He was even able to delay a jutsu to give him time to reach out to his target, which could make his attacks close range, mid or even long range. However, the true reason he was called what he was is because when he was young, with a simple touch of his hand, Kenshin could kill his opponents, cripple them, or even seal them into a void of absolute darkness. It was why he had been so feared and respected by the elemental nations. And it was a major reason as to how he was able to kill off the Kagaya clan so long ago. Shaking his head of those morbid thoughts, Kenshin looked upon the damage of the waterway and could only smile as the repairing seals did its work, as the damage soon repaired themselves. He looked to see his clansmen injured, but fine from the looks of it. Then he felt one of his personal guards appear at his side, causing him to go impassive. Report. Hi, the enemy is in full retreat and those left behind are being dealt with as we speak. Any on the waterway have been neutralized. He said, making Kenshin nod. Casualties? None, sir. However, there is one thing you should note. It's concerning the blonde man from before. He said, causing Kenshin to glance at the shinobi with a raised eyebrow. Yes, what of him? Shamefully, he'd nearly forgotten about the Oda amidst the chaos. Here his shinobi squirmed a little before finally speaking. He's slaughtered the entire main invasion force, sir. The fleet that was to invade us is now burning away atop of the sea. It's also reported that he defeated the Sandame Reikage and Nidame Tsuchikage as well. He said, causing Kenshin's eyes to widen in shock. He'd admit in the deep recesses of his mind he thought the Oda was merely bluffing when he said would take out the entire invasion force, but after hearing that he had not only accomplished that task, but also took out the 2 legendary shinobis, the Sandame Reikage and Mu the Nidame Tsuchikage, all single-handedly meant only one thing. The mysterious Odas truly were a very fearful and powerful clan, of that I no longer doubt, and the fact this man did all that by himself truly astounding. We would have surely lost if he had not defeated those 2 cages. Is that all? He said. No, the man is waiting for you back at the cage tower. We just await your orders, Uzukage-sama. Kenshin just gave nod before speaking. Very well, have our censors scour the rest of the village and outside for any further shinobi, but go ahead and end the evacuation. Tell villagers it is safe, but tell my family to meet me at the cage tower. Now go. The man bowed his head in acceptance. Hi. Vanishing in a Shunshin, Kenshin soon left in a Shunshin as well. It was time he met with the savior of both his daughter and his clan and gave him what he promised. Then he could start preparing his clan for the worst. End. Chapter 2. Message and Departure. Uzumaki Kenshin could not have seen a far better sight than now as he stood within his office looking through his window so that he could oversee the village of Uzushiogakure, the home of the Uzumaki clan itself. It had been merely hours since the failed invasion brought down by the combined forces of Kumo, Iwa and Kiri. Thankfully so far no damage or casualties inside the village have been reported, only the outer edges had any sort of aftermath activity. Just stragglers from the enemy force they had killed on the spot. No more mercy was to be given, an order he personally made to his men. The only reason he spared Mida was to send him back with his tail between his legs. So that he could be the result of what will now happen to anyone that crosses the Uzumaki clan. With how things were to go now, Kenshin had to start preparing his clan for the worst, but first he had something a bit more important to deal with. And it was with that thought he turned around to see possibly the savior of his clan from total extinction. Oda Naruto stood before him in all his noble bodily stature, and any wounds or burns many would have thought he would have received after his battle against main invasion force and the Sandame Reikage and Nidame Tsuchikage were not even seen. Truly he looked as if he hadn't just fought an entire army and 2 legendary cage shinobi. Truly remarkable. Shaking his head, Kenshin addressed the man, sorry to have you wait like this, but before anything I would like formally introduce you to my family and myself. Something I couldn't do beforehand because of what transpired prior. The blonde merely glanced at him before giving him a nod. However, the blonde's mind was on other things which transpired during his fight with the 2 cages, Z and Mu. At the time he was about to finish them, but there was something else that had caught his attention, something that sent a sense of familiarity through him. And being asleep for Kami knows how long, he no longer cared for anything else than to hone in on what made that tremor within the fabric of the spiritual realm. Yet to his annoyance it vanished before he could hone in on its location. From there he didn't feel the need to waste any further time on the 2 cages and merely left them be. However, should they cross sights again, there would not be a second chance. So you're the man that saved Kushina-ni-chan. A voice spoke out, causing Naruto merely glance to his side to see 3 women sitting on a couch against the wall. He looked to see it was 3 deeds with matching similarities that made them easily related. The first one he easily recognized was the ever-excitable Kushina, but it seemed she was wearing better garments than what she was when they arrived. However, it was the other 2 that caught his gaze. The first was a girl that looked everything like Kushina besides a few differences, with her hair being a scarlet shade with bold brown eyes. The girl was dressed in the Uzumaki Kunoichi garb, but in addition she carried a small sigil on her form that showed her a part of the clan head family. The second, however, was a woman that Naruto could easily see was Kushina's mother, just from the sheer fact that her eyes were the exact same shade as Kushina's. Plus the same facial features and slight round eyes were a dead giveaway. Still, as the 3 came inside and as the door closed behind them, he saw Kushina seem to find his gaze, causing her face to light up before she looked away. Slightly bemused at her reaction, he felt a gaze on him, making him look to see Kushina's look-alike seemingly staring at him and if she could through him. However, she was unprepared for her eyes to meet his, because as soon as her brown eyes met his smoldering azure orbs, the scarlet-haired girl was left stricken on the spot. Urza Uzumaki, when she along with her mother and sister came in to see their father after being escorted from the shelters, she was long in wait to see the man that saved her sister. So when she found her gaze from her father and onto the strange man with him, she found her sole attention on him. The way he looked seemed so foreign to what she had seen amongst her clansmen with his robes, but just from looking at him, Urza could feel that he was someone to take note of, and on some level she felt the need to mind herself. That confused her, but when she found her gaze meet smoldering azure orbs of the blonde man, she felt her entire world stop for the briefest second. Urza could see the sheer intensity his eyes held, while unintentionally or not, they gave off a feeling of a cold gaze that sent a shiver up her own spine. Those eyes, they're scarier than Kasan's. Kurara, however, studied Naruto for the briefest moment, and while her 2 daughters seemed to not catch it, she did. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the man's garb and clothing, the way he held himself, and the air of nobility that came off was staggering. There wasn't an ounce of arrogance nor pride that she could see or feel from the blonde-haired man, but she felt a bit uneasy from the sight of his blue eyes. Being the matriarch of the Uzumaki clan, she had seen many nobles in her day, but this man was a different kind, a much different noble from the one she's ever seen. Plus she could feel the way he held himself, which was that of a calm and compassed warrior that seemed relaxed, but the slightest act of aggression would be met with brutal and lethal force in the blink of an eye. Her eyes trailed the man's appearance, remembering every last detail from the unique shade of his bright golden spiky hair and smoldering azure eyes to his unique garments. Certainly he fit the description of the man who saved his daughter, but he didn't look over the age of maybe 20, 21 at the most, and yet Kurara felt this man held more wisdom than even her own grandfather. But then there's that mark he bears, she thought as her eyes briefly rested upon the sigil on Naruto's clothing. Naruto just eyed the one who spoke to him, the scarlet-haired Kushina look-alike, who seemed to freeze upon eye contact before he just nodded her way. You would be correct in your assumption, he led on, causing the girl to stand up before him, pushing down any sense of nervousness she felt prior. She looked up at him with bold brown eyes with her hands placed on her hips. The name is Uzumaki Urza, Kushina Ni-chan's sister. She declared, which only made Naruto give a small nod, already seeing the clear similarities she and Kushina shared. The blonde merely looked at the girl and once again saw that she too was indeed much like her sister. She didn't fear him nor shy away because of his presence, and even though he could see some inkling nervousness, she was still able to stand before him without an ounce of fear. True, she hadn't witnessed what he could do, but still an admirable aspect nonetheless. Kushina just slapped her hand over her face, trying in vain to hide her embarrassment from what her sister had done, and in front of her savior nonetheless. Her eyes glanced to see her mother giving her an amused expression, causing her cheeks to flush a deeper shade of red. She just knew her mother was going to pick at her about this. I see, it is a pleasure, he said, giving a small nod to the girl who blinked at his words before she saw his gaze full on her, causing her cheeks to light up before she looked away. However, Kurara caught it and could merely chuckle at the shyness before she took a step forward, garnering the attention of the blonde man. And I'm Uzumaki Kurara, matriarch of the Uzumaki clan and mother to Kushina and Urza. It's a pleasure to finally meet the man who saved Kushina, so for that you have my utmost gratitude, Naruto-san. She said with a bow. Naruto merely met her bow with a nod of his head. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Uzumaki-san, and as for your daughter, she has done me a service and I chose to repay that in full. Therefore, by saving her and returning her home, my debt to her is paid in full. He said to the Uzumaki family's confusion, but Kushina seemed to understand a bit as a small smile formed on her face. Turning his gaze on Kenshin, he spoke, now Uzumaki-san, I do believe you promised me something in return for helping you and your clan against the forces. You know about my clan and even mentioned a tablet, care to explain? He asked, causing Kenshin to give a sigh, whilst his wife glanced between Naruto and her husband in confusion. Urza and Kushina seemed just as confused as their mother, but they remained silent due to the tension rising within the room. Finally, Kenshin looked toward Naruto and nodded. I did, and I intend to honor my promise, but first, here he snapped his fingers, causing his guards to appear. Waving his hand in dismissal, he spoke, leave us. Hi, Uzumaki-sama. They vanished, leaving the family and Naruto alone in the office. The Oda raised an eyebrow when Kenshin wordlessly walked over to a vacant wall on the left side of his desk. Pulling his hand up, he bit his thumb before swiping his blood on the wall, and then a seal appeared glowing a bright red color before it shimmered away as the sound of a distant lock being unlocked rang out. Looking over his shoulder, he nodded towards Naruto. Follow me, Oda Dono, he said, causing the man to nod. Kurara, on the other hand's eyes snapped wide open when she heard the name Oda. She snapped her gaze directly toward the blonde with a sense of bewilderment and even disbelief. That is until she saw Kenshin looking at her with dead serious eyes. Kurara, bring Kushina and Urza as well, with them being the heir to the clan they must learn of the secrets and that of the history of our ancestors. He received confused glances from the two girls, but Kurara masked her shock before giving a nod. Very well. Satisfied with that, Kenshin turned back to the wall as it slowly started to slide down into the floor, revealing a winding staircase that went down into the blackness. Now if you will follow me, I will show you all the Uzumaki know of your clan, Naruto-san. The blonde merely gave him a nod before he followed him in with the three redeeds in tow. As they walked in, the wall slid back in place, hiding any signs of what just transpired. But Naruto, as he traversed the deep staircase, he looked into the deepening darkness with narrowed eyes. When he took that first step onto the staircase, he felt that very same familiar dinging sound from before when he was fighting the two cages. Only now it was getting stronger as he went deeper into the abyss. He could feel a sort of spiritual power as he went deeper within. It felt very familiar to him, but he couldn't put his finger on it. So where are we going exactly to, San? Kushina asked the same question that her twin had been thinking. However, it was Kurara that answered her question. We're heading into the ancestral vault of the Uzumaki clan, where the heads of our clan of the past have all passed on. Their knowledge, history, techniques and all that has happened in the past are recorded and stored into the vault. It is there where the next era heirs, when they are of the right age, are to go, as it is their birthright, and learn what it means to be the head of the Uzumaki clan. Entry into the vault is only allowed by the blood of the current clan head and those of his blood-related kin. She said, causing Kenshin to nod. Yes, and though I wanted to keep this a secret for a bit longer, it seems I can't hold it out any longer. There are many secrets the clan left behind for us, some of which we still have yet to decipher, but I think that now we shall all learn one of our deepest secrets with Oda Dono here. He said, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow. However, he remained silent as they continued their trek into the abyss, but it was when he heard Kushina's sister Urza speak, as she eyed him with a studious gaze. I have a question if you don't mind, what was the Oda clan, Naruto-san? asking him directly, causing him to look her way while her family seemed a bit tense at her words, Kushina more so, while Kenshin kept a sharp glance between her Musume and the Oda. Naruto just kept his gaze securely on Urza, staring her down for the briefest of moments before he looked ahead as they stepped further into the darkness, with the dimly lit torches lighting their path. The Oda clan, my clan, were a proud noble people that did not rely on this energy you call chakra, but on the separate energies that made up the two worlds. The world you, and the majority I would say, know as the physical world, and the other world known solely as the spiritual world. We lived as nomads cut off from the rest of society, but we would tend to assist those that needed the help of our clan. He explained, only for Urza to frown in confusion. So your clan were like monks? She asked, causing Naruto close his eyes. In the manner of speaking, this response only intrigued her further by how he seemed to answer her and then again avoid her question. Still, she had another question that when she spoke it gained the attention of her family. What about this spiritual world? What did you mean by that? What is it exactly? She asked, only to gain a cold chill when Naruto looked her way with an even colder glaze in his eyes than usual. To be blunt, I mean the realm of the dead. The spiritual world is a place my clan was able to traverse and embrace because we welcomed the ideal of another world beyond the material one. This is why we were able to traverse the realm of the dead, or as others may call it, the underworld, city of the dead, even Makai in some cases. Now that is all I shall speak about this matter, he said, cutting off all other attempts for information. Still, what he said was enough to leave them all in a state of shock if what Naruto said was true and that the Oda clan was potentially able to do the things he said made them question. Who or what exactly was the Oda clan? Ancestral Uzumaki vault. When the group reached the last step, they were greeted with a black dimly lit chamber with two underground walls leading from the stairs directly a few feet from them. Ahead of them was another giant wall, only in the middle of it was giant set of doors crafted by a strange metal alloy due to the silvery shade the doors gave off. Even then, Naruto saw attached on the sides of the two doors were torches giving off a dimly lit orange glow which revealed the many set of seals placed upon the door. He couldn't even count how many seals were on it, but among them he did see one in particular in the dead center. The seal looked like any normal paper seal tag, but it glowed with a variety of different colors from red, green, yellow to even black, all of which were morphing into one another. He followed Kenshin whilst Kurara stood with her two surprised daughters, whilst the Uzukage stepped toward the door. Only the blood of the current clan head can open this door, and should anyone that wasn't a clan head try to breach this door, it would react with lethal force. This door hasn't been opened since my ceremony to becoming the clan head, but now things have become too dire for it to remain closed. He said before he walked closer to the door before he nicked his finger. Letting the blood flow around his hand, he placed his palm on the seal and uttered only one word. Hi. It was in that moment the seal reacted with Kenshin's touch as it slowly started to glow a bright white before the glow soon faded, only to have the seal meld into the door. From there the doors started to open, causing a great rumbling sound to occur within the room. As they opened, a deafening howl of wind circulated out from the doors, blowing into the faces of the 5 occupants, but 3 of the 5 remained impassive as they were greeted to another chamber where darkness itself seemed to engulf the very chamber. Upon entering with Naruto and his family in tow, Kenshin merely slammed his hand on the wall to his right before he spoke again. Hi. Then the doors behind them slowly closed, but while they did so the group was greeted with rows upon rows of torches lit up. The vastness of these torches kept going for what seemed like miles, lighting up the darkness before them until braziers hanging from the walls and the ceiling lit up. Finally he watched a row of torches stop nearly 3 miles ahead, only light up another set of torches that lit the other side of the wall. Then Naruto fully looked on the content of what lay within the vault. Kushina and Urza said in unison as the two stared up in sheer awe at what the two were seeing, and Naruto couldn't really blame the two girls, for even he was a bit impressed with what he saw. The Uzumaki truly had been holding everything they ever learned, created or gained over their many years of existing. Because shelves upon shelves filled to the brim with books and scrolls littered the many hallways. The sheer number of them was truly amazing to say the least, and that wasn't counting the number of artifacts all being held on pedestals among the walls to his left and right. So, what do you think, Oda Dono? Kenshin asked, only to receive a nod from the man. Impressive, Uzumaki-san, your clan's knowledge has exceeded my expectations because to gather this vast amount of knowledge is simply astounding and a symbol to your clan's hard work and willpower. I'm honored to hear you say that, but please, all that the Uzumaki know of your clan are kept securely separate from my clan's own. This way, he said, leading the man and the silent awe-stricken girls and a silent Kurara down into the vault's contents. Following Kenshin, Naruto kept his gaze steadfast, but that same dinging sound only got stronger, and now he could even pinpoint its location, leading his gaze to be directly toward the opposite wall to the entrance of the vault. He walked with Kenshin as the man led them up a staircase leading up to the wall. The wall itself seemed to be made out of the same material as the door had been, but walking to a particular wall, Naruto beheld the sight of yet another door, only this one held another seal. One of which Kenshin released, but this time stood aside causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow at the man. He saw this and bowed his head respectfully. This door leads into the chamber of the Oda where all that we know and have learned about your clan has been stored for all these years. It is only fitting for the first person to ever enter this chamber be Oda Dono. He said, causing Naruto to stare at the man before he looked towards the door for the briefest of seconds. That infernal dinging sound was so strong that if Naruto hadn't channeled his energy into his ears, they would have bled due to the sheer intensity of it, but now he knew that Kenshin spoke the truth, for whatever lay behind this door did belong to his clan. Because those of the spiritual realm would be able to hear the sound and sense the many spiritual residue within. Still, it made him wonder as to why the Uzumaki had done this, why save his clan's knowledge and whatever history they could find for safekeeping. What had caused them to do this, and for that matter what had his clan done in his absence. Placing his palm on the door, he pushed it open and walked in, soon followed by the Uzumakis, and it was there Naruto's eyes' azure orb surveyed the contents within the chamber. Unlike the Uzumaki's vault, what as within this one didn't even hold a quarter of the Uzumaki's knowledge, but that didn't matter to Naruto. His eyes swept across the chamber, counting at least 4 bookshelves, holding a vast amount of dusty old scrolls that seemed to haven't been touched in ages. However, among them it was the object that lay in the middle of the chamber that caught his attention the most. It was a giant tablet standing on the floor. It stood nearly 7 feet tall and 4 feet in width. However, age seemed to have never touched the tablet, due the stone not have crumbled away, and the text etched into the stone wasn't even faded in the slightest. It was this very text that covered the entire stone's smooth end. The dialect that confused Kushina and Urza, since it didn't look like anything they had seen in their teachings before. Kenshin seemed to catch what his eyes were on and decided to elaborate. This is the only artifact we have ever recovered from your clan. A tablet my great-grandfather Uzumaki Raijin had discovered in some ruins in Oni no Kuni, and when we discovered it to be connected to the Oda clan, we seized it as quickly as possible. However, we have never been able to decipher its contents or the message your clan left behind, and that leads me to believe that they left this message for someone, a possible descendant perhaps, but now that you have appeared I know it was meant for you," he said. Naruto merely nodded before he walked up to the tablet, before he looked up at the very top of the scripture and spoke. "Even if you had mastered my clan's language, the Uzumaki clan would have never translated this, because this was meant for the eyes of the next head," he said, causing Kenshin's eyes to widen. Naruto ignored this in favor of reading the scripture, the text and the words left behind by his clan. Raising his hand, his index finger soon glowed a faint blue before his finger met in contact with the tablet before he closed his eyes. Then the text glowed blue as well before they started to appear in his mind, relaying the message within his mind for him to see. "I know you will find this, Naruto Dono, and that is why I shall leave these messages for you to find and for you to learn of what's happened since your absence. I leave these tablets for your eyes only. As the next heir to the clan, your eyes will be the only ones that can read this, of that I made sure of. Now I won't be able to fit all of this on one tablet, so there will be more where they are. Even I don't know where they will end up with my death. But I know you will find them, but for now I leave this dire message for you, so that you can learn of what's happened. When you entered the Shinsei Suman, the elders tried to make sure the clan survived until your awakening, but with that traitor on the loose, we could do nothing as he destroyed all of what made us a clan. He's systematically killing us off like a snake's venom does to its prey. That is why after nearly 5 years nearly half of our original numbers had been killed off by either that traitor or his partner's forces. It was because of this the remainder of us fled our home, where I took everything including the most precious object to our clan with us. It was during this time we met with a tribe of nomads that specialized in sealing, and in return for helping us we helped them learn the ways of fighting. Their art of sealing proved useful for many of our knowledge to be kept locked away. We became allies, and hopefully that alliance still stands even now in whatever time you awaken in. But what is important for you to know above all else is that he is still out there, and with you gone he has done everything he can to kill us off and take what is yours. You know of what I speak of, the most blessed artifact of our clan passed down from your father's father. I've done as you have asked and hidden it away should this have ever happened, but if anything he has proven to be quite stubborn in his search for it. But I know that you will awaken and keep it out of his hands, for it was meant only for your hands, Naruto Dono. I am running out of room, so I shall continue my message and record all that's happened to the next tablet. Hopefully you find it by then and search for what has been kept hidden away from the traitor's hands. This is farewell for now, my friend. Oda Kisuke, keeper of the Oda clan's records." Blinking, Naruto narrowed his eyes with the information given to him. His finger left the tablet, but all the information given to him made him just stand there as his mind soaked up everything he learned. The events prior to his eventual absence had been under rather stressful times, with the Jubi's awakening. His coming time for the Shinsei Suman was nearing. There was no avoiding the sleep as it was a sacred tradition for every future head to take. Shinsei Suman was a sacred act where every heir to the Oda clan would come of age and having proved their skill and prowess in the clan's ways would enter a state of deep slumber. This was in hopes they would leave their body on the spiritual level so that their soul could delve into the realm of the spiritual and harmonize itself with the world of the spiritual. It was a rite of passage, and should you succeed in awakening from the slumber, then you would be downed as the next clan head of the Oda clan. The estimated time to awaken is never predetermined, but in most cases one would awaken after a few days, others weeks, and some rare cases a year or two. But there was risks because in some cases many never woke up again. However, Naruto's mind raced on trying to think up as to why he had been asleep for so long. He now knew that it had been more than a millennium since he went into slumber, but to sleep for so long, while his clan was in peril. Why, it only felt like yesterday that I'd faced the Juubi. Did the sleep truly affect my sense of time for so long? He remembered delving into darkness and linking himself with the reel of spirits. His time in the realm was long, but to sleep this long. His hands twitched at the mention Kisuke's message, and the words he spoke of his eyes turned soulless as he remembered of whom he spoke of. The traitor. He knew of the man Kisuke spoke of. After all, the man had betrayed his clan to a foreign element in the old days when the elemental nations was still new. Punishment for that was death, but the man proved elusive like that of a ghost in many aspects, but as the blonde looked down at his hand, he clenched it till his knuckles popped, while his azure eyes hardened in a cold merciless glaze. You escaped my grasp once, but you shall not do so again. Releasing his hand in its vice clench, he looked toward the stone again with a monotonous expression. You did your duty well, Kisuke, now rest. Then Naruto. Are you okay? Kushina's voice echoed within his ears, causing him to look to the side where he saw Kushina standing at his side looking at him with a worried gaze. Deciding to ease her worry, he gave a nod before he looked back at the tablet that seemed drained in some manner. Yes, Kushina, I'm fine, just a lot to take in, so don't worry about me, he said, but he did notice the way she seemed to gaze at him longer than before, as if truly peering at him to see if he was lying. Her deep-seated worry for him confused him, but what surprised him was how this young girl was actually learning to quickly read him even better than most people in his time ever had. It was small, but she was learning nonetheless. Pushing these thoughts to the back of his mind, he turned toward Kenshin and nodded. It would seem we have much to speak about. Kenshin Uzumaki, he said, causing the man to frown in confusion. Uzumaki clan household. So what you read in that tablet specifies of an alliance made between your clan and the ancestors to the Uzumakis. Is that why our clan has always kept our vigilance for any information regarding the Odas? To keep all historic records of our ancient allies that even predate the time of our ancestors? Kenshin asked himself as he and his family were situated within his study. He looked to see Naruto standing out near the window as he looked out at the village. The trip from the vault to his household had been a quiet one, since the village was still tense due to the attempted invasion, so they had been able to get to his home unhindered, despite the looks they received from the one or two villager or clansmen that saw them. That would be correct in assuming that those same nomads were indeed the very same ancestors to your clan. Taking this into consideration, my clan seemed to have been the ones who taught your ancestors how to fight, and in return gave my clansmen shelter. He said before Kenshin seemed to massage his temples as the flux of information coming his way. To be honest, he shouldn't be surprised because he always had an inkling suspicion that the Uzumaki were allies with the Oda and way back, but to hear they had actually taught them how to fight in the old days was shocking even for him. Was there anything else on the tablet? Kenshin asked, only to have Naruto close his eyes and shake his head. No, only affairs concerning my clan that I must fix on my own, he said, causing him to receive confused looks. Kenshin and Kurara, well, he got a worried one from Kushina. Urza on the other hand frowned at his words. While the scarlet-haired tomboy was captivated by a great many things that had happened in the last few hours, her interest was growing minute by minute in not only this seemingly old clan that had been allies of her ancestors way back, but in the man who had saved her sister from a fate worse than death. Not that she would say it. Kenshin just nodded in respect. Very well, but the question now is, what will you do now? He only received a raised eyebrow from the blonde before he looked back out at the village. His gaze looking out in the far distance of the mainland. I must go and deal with this matter at hand. As he said this, he missed the look he got from his wayward red-eyed companion as she gazed at him with a look of worry. In all honesty, Kushina didn't want him to go, not after all he's done for her, her home and her family, just for him to up and leave. Plus the time she spent traveling with him back to her homeland had been possibly some moments she had ever had in her life. Granted, she didn't know as much about him as she did now, but still being with the blonde for all this time spawned a feeling of wanting him to stay. Still, her gaze fell as she realized one thing: he has no obligations to stay, nor should I be selfish about this, he does have his own goals to accomplish. Yet the pain stung at knowing he was going to leave. It felt like a dull pain at first, but hearing him actually say it felt like a dagger stabbed into her heart, and it twisted to deepen the pain. Kurara looked down at her daughter and frowned at her state of quick depression. It was small, but she had noticed it when Naruto said those words. No, it was before then she had noticed that she was nervous about the inevitable, but she saw her flinch and looked down in sadness at his response. A small sad smile crossed Kurara's features as she looked down at her downtrodden daughter. In truth, she knew right when her daughter came bursting through the door running into her arms, telling of her of what happened, that the blonde Oda had not only made a deep impression on Kushina. He had done much more than that. He'd become very important to Kushina in such a small amount of time. She dare say her daughter was beginning to become smitten by him. Then again, it's too soon to tell, but she is showing the signs. But for now, let your Kachan help you out, my little Musume, she thought as she gazed at her daughter with a loving gaze. Then she turned her gaze toward the silent Naruto before she spoke. Excuse me, Naruto Dono. She spoke, causing the man to look her way. Yes, Uzumaki-san. He asked, only for the woman to smile as she gained confused looks from the others before she said only one thing that gained varied reactions. I would like to humbly ask of one small thing of you, if you would be so inclined. She said with a sweet smile whilst Naruto looked at her with a keen eye. And that would be? He said, only for Kurara to point her hand to Kushina, causing her eyes to widen as she spoke. Take Kushina with you on this trip, she said, causing Kenshin's eyes to widen before he received a sharp look from his wife with the message being clear. We'll discuss this later. Urza on the other hand looked like a fish out of water, complete the expression, and all as she looked from her mother to the silent blonde back and forth she went as she tried to comprehend what her mother had just suggested. Finally she felt her mind reboot, only for her plop down on the couch as she came to realize something as her eyes went from her mother to her sister. Ah-chan is planning something again. Her mother had always been like that, a schemer, but this was new even for her. She then looked at her sister, only for her brown eyes to widen when she saw Kushina's face looking positively shocked, so stumped that Kushina hadn't even uttered a single word. She waved her hand in front of Kushina's face before starting to poke, pull and pinch her cheeks before flicking her in the forehead. Nothing. Naruto on the other hand kept his gaze coolly on the still smiling woman, and while normally he would have outright denied the woman's request on the basis Kushina would only be a hindrance to his goal. However, that was not the case, because Kushina was in fact not defenseless of that. He knew, because while she was still in training, he had seen her practicing as they traveled to Yuzu no Kuni, and he could assume her skill was on par with some of the ranking shinobi called Genin or Chunin he'd heard about. Yes, she was young, but when he was thrown in the field he was much younger and had done a lot more than she ever had at her age. The training he went through, the spars, battles, and eventual kills he made for his clan had been for its safety. Plus, if he was being honest, he could sense an abnormal amount of potential in Kushina from the moment he saw her practice. That, and admitted, my wielder, you have gained a soft spot for young Uzumaki, an age-old voice boomed within his mind, causing him to frown slightly. Of all the times for you to contact me, it's now, and about this of all things he voiced his thoughts in his inner world, only to gain a chuckle in response. Details, what I'm more interested in is the fact you did not deny what I just said. Naruto could swear he heard amusement lacing his tenant's tone. Deciding not to respond, he kept his gaze on Kurara for a moment before he turned his gaze toward Kushina. Why ask me this? Why ask me to take your daughter and heiress to the Uzumaki clan with me? A trip that will undoubtedly be dangerous to her life. What makes you trust me with her life, Uzumaki-san? He asked, only for him to gain a small tick in his brow when he saw her smile widen. Because for one, even if you weren't an Oda, you saved my home from devastation, meaning you are a man I can trust with my daughter's safety. 2. You saved her life and even brought her back home, no matter the circumstances, still speaks well about your character. And most importantly 3, I think she would do very well to travel with you for a bit, she said, seemingly point out 3 major points that seemed to prove that she made her point. Still Naruto remained silent before he looked towards Kushina, bringing his full attention on her and seeing how she felt his gaze on, and she looked up at him only for her face to turn beet red. He spoke. Still, this is her choice to make, nor will you make that decision for her, so what do you say, Kushina? Addressing the redeed, causing her to shake from her shock-induced stupor, only to find herself again stricken under Naruto's azure gaze. Being rooted on the spot, Kushina for once didn't even know what to say. While she was still shocked at her mother's proposal and secretly thanking her for it, she was still surprised that Naruto, her savior, the cold merciless blonde, was actually considering it, and with her own approval at that. Still feeling the full weight of this, Kushina looked at her family, her contemplative father, her smiling if a bit scheming mother, and expecting twin sister. If she accepted, she would be leaving them behind temporarily, though it still meant she would be willing to leave them to travel with Naruto. The travel with him again caused a feeling of happiness to swell up in her chest, but at the same time nervous to the unknown. Then she looked to Naruto before her violet eyes went up into his azure orbs, and right then as she looked into his eyes, Kushina decided. I'll go, she said as a fierce fire of determination burst forth in her eyes. A sight that brought a smile to her father. Her mother only smiled even more, whilst Urza seemed to be happy with her choice. She looked a bit sad, but quickly hid it well. But it was Naruto that saw the glow the most, and for the first time in a long while a small smirk crossed his features, his eyes lit up slightly at seeing the amount of drive the young girl was giving off in her eyes. It was deep and intense, something he hadn't seen since. Remind you of someone. His inner tenant seemed to read his thoughts, and Naruto just kept silent. Clap. Well, since that is decided, Kushina, go pack your essentials, Naruto Dono will meet you at the gate. Urza, go and help your sister if you would be so kind, Kurara proclaimed, causing the two girls to nod before they raced off into the household. From there the last remaining three were left with silence before Kenshin spoke. If you could have my daughter back in 3 months from now, that would be greatly appreciated, Naruto Dono. He asked, getting a raised eyebrow from the man whilst Kurara giggled into her hand. What he means to say is that he wants to have Kushina back in at least 3 months' time so she can start her training in more of the Uzumaki clan's techniques. Seeing as she is in the clan's eyes, the heiress, she and Urza will be needing more advanced training as they mature. However, until then I don't see why she can't travel with you for a bit, she said. Naruto merely gave a nod before Kenshin reached under his desk before pulling out a spare rolled up parchment. Handing it to Naruto, he spoke, seeing the confusion forming on his face. Now with that settled, I would like to give you a map since I am sure the elemental nations has changed since your time. He said, making Naruto raise an eyebrow before he took the map from the Uzukage's hand. Unfurling the map, his eyes scanned the parchment, giving it a once-over, taking in each point of all the countries from Uzu no Kuni to the 5 major countries. He viewed the minor ones and seen as a matter of fact that many countries outnumbered the major ones like Hai no Kuni or Kaminari no Kuni. Still, overall, looking at the sheer scale, the land he once knew had indeed changed from just the sheer change in structure, or at least from what he was seeing on the map. It was moderate but enough to change many things. Still, he rolled it back up and put it away inside his robes before he looked towards the two. Very well, I shall make my departure as soon as Kushina meets me by the gate. And with that said, he turned and walked towards the door, only as his hand went to grab the knob he heard Kenshin speak. Naruto Dono, well, I know you are more than capable, please make sure Kushina comes back, we nearly lost her once, so please as a father take care of her, will you? He asked. Well, he didn't know what his wife was planning. Kenshin was already thinking up the pros of allowing Kushina to go along with his wife's suggestion. Her safety was a priority, that much can be assured, but protecting the clan was important, and the village was still tense after all that's happened, so to assure Kushina's safety, he was all for to let her go along with Naruto. If he were any other man he would have declined, but he knew Naruto was capable. Not only was he powerful, if he was able to do what he did to the main invasion force, but also he was an ally of the Uzumaki, a friendship held between his and Naruto's clan that went so deep that it went back to the time of his ancestors. If there was anyone he could trust with his daughter's safety, it was the blonde himself. Not only that, but with her out of the village, it decreases the chance of Konoha asking for her or any potential leak in the village, getting out that she was in the village. With her traveling with Naruto, it both gives me a chance to root out any leaks in the village's defense system and deal with Konoha as a whole, was his thoughts. Not knowing this, his wife was thinking entirely different matters concerning this event. Had he known what her intentions were, he may have been a bit more hesitant to allow this. The blonde decided to speak. You have my word as an Oda, Uzumaki Kenshin, that no harm shall befall the girl. Now I must be off. Gaining a nod from the two, he opened the door and left, leaving the two Uzumakis alone, only for Kenshin to glance toward his wife with a studious gaze. Okay, Kurara-chan, what are you planning at now? He asked, only to receive a small slap on the head from his wife. He frowned as she gave a soft giggle. Her violet eyes peered down at him with a look he knew all too well from their youth. Mischief was clear as day in those eyes, and it only caused a sinking feeling in his stomach from the way she smiled at him. Nothing, dear, nothing at all, just helping out our little Kushi-chan, she said, causing Kenshin to raise an eyebrow at his wife. Help her how? But to his annoyance, his wife just sauntered off while twirling her finger in the air. Oh, nothing, just giving her a little push in the right direction is all. And thankfully, Kurara thanked how dense her husband could be at times, she could literally feel his confused eyes staring into her back. Still, she wondered how things would progress between her Musume and the blonde Oda during this trip. His Ushiagakure's gate. Kushina was literally beaming with excitement as she stood side by side with her blonde traveling companion. While she had been still surprised at what was happening, she was coming to terms with the fact that she was actually going to be able to travel the elemental nations, and with Naruto, which only made it all the better for her. Hell, she wanted to hug her mother fiercely for giving her this chance. She was fine with smiling as wide as she could at Hour's equally smiling mother. She'd packed her essentials in a variety of storage scrolls which she put into her backpack, but she still replaced some of her clothing with the Uzukanoichi standard. Like her sister, she wore similar gear, but instead of long-sleeved shirt, she wore a short-sleeved with a black long-sleeved shirt underneath. She wore black pants that went down to her black shinobi sandals, while strapped her right hip was a kunai shuriken pouch, while on her left hip was a variety of 6 scrolls strapped to her hip in a leather holster. Finally proudly tied around her forehead was the Uzushio headband in all its glory securely fashioned on her forehead. Her hair fell down her back as usual with her two trademark twin bangs framing her face. A trait she shared with her twin sister. Overall Kushina looked ready and rearing to go, but she stayed put as she said her goodbyes to her family, while Naruto stood off to the side looking out from the village, keeping his gaze firmly out on the mainland. You better be careful out there Nissan and try not to get yourself into too much trouble, okay? Her sister said, causing Kushina to pout at her smirking sister before pinching her cheeks, causing her yelp. Shut up, Tebane. She continued to pull her Urza's cheeks only for her hands to be slapped away before Urza surprised her by giving her a hug. With her eyes going wide at the contact, Kushina looked down as Urza hugged her sister for all she was worth, and it was there she heard her sister speak. Please be safe Kushina ni, I'll miss you. Urza spoke with her words, carrying a soft tone of worry for her sister. Kushina just smiled before wrapping her arms around her sister. Don't worry, I'll be fine, worry about getting stronger till the next time we meet, okay? She felt her sister nod into her shoulder before Urza pulled away, only to give a silent glare directed to the blonde as if scrutinizing him. Kushina saw this and sighed at her sister's action, perhaps Urza was a bit more protective of her than she first thought. Henshin just put his hand on top of Urza's head while he gave a respectful nod to the blonde who seen it from the corner of his return before looking to his daughter. Now Kushina, I want you to take this as a chance to learn all you can and take this as a lesson to learn of the world we live in. All may not look as it seems from first glance, so take this as a chance to learn and grow as a respectful kunoichi, understand? He said, causing Kushina to look up at her father with a serious expression before she gave a nod. I will too, San. She said with a nod while her eyes glowed with that same intense drive that even now Naruto saw to be extremely nostalgic. Then Kurara came up before pulling her daughter in for a hug, but it was when she bent down to her ears that Kurara spoke, so her words were only heard by Kushina. And while you do what your father suggested, Musume, don't forget to find the time to have fun. Musume, life is too short to not experience a bit of fun. So take the time to enjoy this trip with Naruto-san, okay? She said with a wink, causing Kushina to blink at her mother as she tried to comprehend her words. That was when she realized what she was implying, causing her face to flush a deep cherry red before pulling away as if she was burned while looking away from not only her smirking mother but especially Naruto. Though she did not want Naruto to see her face right now. Stupid Ka-san, why won't she stop saying such embarrassing things? Was her thoughts, but still her mother's words were now teasing and haunting her at the back of her mind. Like an annoying gnat that wouldn't stop flying around you. Taking a chance, her eyes glanced to Naruto only to look away when she found him looking her way with a raised eyebrow. Feeling everything was settled, the blonde turned to Kushina, are you ready to go? His voice seemed to cause her to tense before she dared to look his way before giving a meek nod. Hi. But that Naruto nodded before he started to walk away, followed by Kushina, leaving her family to look at their backs as they traversed into the forests and out of the village. This time for a good amount of time, with one of the Uzumaki clan's heiress traveling with the heir to the Uzumaki's oldest allies. Truly a unique sight if someone besides the family knew of Naruto's status. Still, this presented a question: what will happen now with the likes of Naruto Oda unleashed upon the elemental nations after so long in deep slumber? No one could tell. And what if Naruto saves Kushina from Kumo? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.